Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board. We have, as ever, quite a comprehensive agenda this afternoon, and so we will move straight on to the agenda before us. First of all, can I ask whether there are any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair. Good afternoon, members. We have apologies today from Ronnie Erskine and we have Donald McPherson as a substitute. We also have apologies from Jackie Pepper and Ian McCartney. Are you happy, Chair, if I do a quick roll call just to check who's all present?
Yes, if you would, please, Scott. Thank you.
OK, thanks. If members can just call out their name to confirm that they're present. Councillor Duff.
Present.
Councillor Xander McDade.
Present.
Councillor Callum Purvis.
Present.
Bob Benson. I think we're having some technical difficulties with Bob, so we'll hopefully have him in soon. Donald McPherson.
Present.
Pat Kilpatrick.
Present.
Beth Hamilton.
Present.
Gordon Patterson.
Present.
Jane Smith.
Present.
Dr. Lee Robertson.
Present.
Sarah Dickey.
Present.
Bernie Campbell.
Present.
And I think we also have Maureen Summers also in attendance as well.
Present.
And Lindsay Glover.
Present.
Stuart Hope.
Present.
Can I just remind everyone else to mute their microphones if they're not speaking, thanks. Sandy Watts.
Present.
Sandra Auld.
Present.
And Lynn Blair.
Present.
Thank you. And we also have a number of officers from the Health and Social Care Partnership who are in attendance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Scott. And as you say, hopefully the Vice Chair, Bob Benson, will join us presently, and then we'll be all present and correct that are intended to be here. So thank you for that. OK, so item 2 on the agenda, can I ask whether there are any declarations of interest in respect of the business of the meeting this afternoon? If so, please can you type DI in the chat, and if you don't have access to the chat for some reason, if you can please put your camera on and indicate to me by waving or whatever, that would be good. I'll give it a few seconds to see if there are any declarations of interest. Doesn't appear to be. So move on therefore to item 3, which is the minutes of previous meetings. There are 2 sets of minutes on this occasion. The first one is a minute of the meeting of the Integration Joint Board on the 31st of March 2021. Can I ask whether there are any points or inaccuracies that members wish to make in respect of these minutes? No, doesn't appear to be. OK, can I take these as approved? Thank you. And the second set of minutes is the minute of the meeting of Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board of 23rd April. And again, can I ask whether there are any items of inaccuracy or comments that members wish to make? And again, I don't see anything coming forward. So if I may, can I take these as approved? I'll take silence as your approval. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the action points update. And if I can, at this point, hand over to Chief Officer Gordon Patterson to give his commentary on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I'm actually going to ask Jane Smith to provide an update. I know that she's had some recent discussions in this regard, please.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm pleased to say that the NHS Tayside Director of Finance, Stuart Lyle, and the 3 Chief Finance Officers across Tayside have met twice in recent weeks and have another meeting planned in the next 2 weeks to take forward the development of the financial framework to support mental health services. This will build on the draft financial plan developed by Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership with the Integrated Leadership Team, which was passed over to NHS Tayside as part of the handover of operational responsibility in June last year, and that will be the foundation for the financial framework moving forward. And I'll bring back a formal update to the IJB as part of the September finance report. Thank you.
Helpful, Jane. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members in respect of that update? Any matters arising? Which is item 5 on the agenda. No, doesn't appear to be anything. Motoring through it just now. MD would think we were halfway finished, but of course we're not. So we now move on to item 6 on the agenda, the first substantive item, which is under the heading of Finance and Governance, and a report on the 2021 financial position. And again, I'd ask Jane Smith to come in, please.
Thank you, Chair. What we'd like to do this afternoon is provide you with just a very short presentation tying together the year-end financial outturn report with the draft annual accounts for 2021 approved by the Audit and Performance Committee of the IJB last week, and which will be circulated to all IJB members for information after this meeting. I should note that both the accounts themselves and the outturn report have been subject to the scrutiny of the Audit and Performance Committee last week. However, we felt it important to give the wider IJB a chance to understand the presentation and the link between the two. So, on the 31st of March 2020, the IJB set a budget for the year ahead with an expectation of an overspend of 1.1 million. By then, however, COVID-19 was upon us, and the IJB noted the significant uncertainty for services and for expenditure levels. We know now and can see clearly from the 2021 outturn finance report that the impact on expenditure levels has been significant. A £3.9 million underspend on the operational position, alongside £8.293 million of expenditure in terms of our direct response to the pandemic, though that expenditure met in full by additional Scottish Government income. Zoe Robertson and Evelyn Devine will shortly provide a brief overview of the key drivers of the operational underspend. But first of all, thank you, Audrey. If I can take you through the link between the financial statements and the operational underspend. Overall, the annual accounts set out an overall underspend for the IJB of 12.741 million. And you can see in the slide in front of you that that starts off with the operational surplus of 3.887 million, which is in the report. On top of that, however, we have 4.547 million of Scottish Government excess funding for COVID costs in 2021 being carried forward by the IJB as an earmarked reserve to meet 21-22 COVID costs, and that's in line with our financial plan assumptions. On top of that, we have £1.4 million of bridging finance transferred by NHS Tayside in 2021 to be carried forward to balance our financial position in 21-22. Over and above that, we have 2.907 million of additional Scottish Government allocations received in 2021 to be carried forward in earmarked reserves to meet future year spending commitments. I'll come back to our reserves position shortly, but firstly hand over to Evelyn and then to Zoe to describe the key factors driving our 2021 operational underspend. If we can move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Chair. I'm just going to describe some of the reasons for the variances in the health budgets over the last year. So as you can see there, in terms of staffing cost, we've had underspends in community hospitals, minor injuries, physiotherapy, general adult psychiatry, community and intermediate care. So there's probably two elements to this in relation to our variances. One is the use of redeployed staff during the pandemic, which actually reduced our reliance on agency and bank staff, certainly in and around our community hospitals. And the second point to make there is that recruitment and slippage in recruitment was quite significant during the pandemic, certainly in waves 1 and 2, and with staff probably nationally not moving very far from the post that they were in during COVID. So we had, in fact, probably several rounds of recruitment in some of these significant areas where we have been underspent. In relation to investment monies, as the IJB members will know, we had an Invest to Save programme that we had agreed, and within that there was to be a review of our rehabilitation beds. This in fact was paused during COVID, as it was very difficult to continue with that in terms of not understanding the demands that we would need within the pandemic. So hence we did not continue to look at investment in intermediate care beds, as that was part of that Invest to Save programme. In relation to the respiratory care team, again, it goes back to the ability to recruit to the team. We went through 3 rounds of recruitment before we were successful. We now have recruited to the respiratory team, and it has been up and running for several months now. So that is really just a slippage in recruitment. So from my perspective, they were the 2 main elements. One was slippage in recruitment, and the other was being able to redeploy staff to support some areas with high spend. Thank you, Jane. I'll pass over to Zoe.
Hello. Despite the underspend, the partnership has continued to provide support to all client groups across Perth and Kinross throughout the pandemic. However, face-to-face provision was in some cases scaled back on the basis of risk assessment, or delivery models were altered as we prioritised essential provision. Workers have provided support virtually wherever possible via telephone or Teams or Near Me. Hard to reach clients have been provided with mobile phones to help them stay in contact with services. Face-to-face support has been available throughout if a person would have been deemed as critical or at substantial risk. There have been increases in particular areas of service delivery, such as carer support or support with mental health issues and support for alcohol-related issues. We have, however, experienced a reduction in number of people moving to care homes and number of people going into a care home for respite. The significant reduction in demand for care home placements is likely to be temporary, and demand is expected to increase as confidence in the sector grows again. And in fact, we are now seeing a decrease in under occupancy levels and people again being admitted to care homes. The number of people being supported by internal and external care at home decreased significantly at the start of the pandemic, but we're now experiencing heightened demand, which may be because people avoided coming forwards during the height of the first 2 waves, or the unpaid carers took on more support during lockdown. Those now being referred are often more dependent than those referred pre-pandemic.
Sorry, just before you continue, I just wondered if we could move on to the next slide. I don't know who's... There we are. That's it. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So to address some of these pressures, we've increased numbers of carer support workers with 4 mental health posts for the access team. Establishment of our switch team, which is part of our care at home portfolio, funded enhanced carer posts within the independent sector and provided targeted additional funding for our third sector partners. Day centres also had to close during the height of the pandemic, but have now reopened with reduced numbers. However, virtual support and classes have been offered throughout and are still available, and in some cases people are choosing that as their preference now. The staffing underspend has been caused in the majority by vacancies not being able to be filled during the pandemic. Staff retasking was able to absorb some of those pressures. We're experiencing ongoing staffing pressures due to vacancies, recruitment challenges, COVID and non-COVID absences. And we're now seeking to advance a remobilisation plan, although the increased case numbers in community services will require us to monitor the situation and refine our responses accordingly, and in essence be fairly agile with our responses at this juncture.
Thank you very much, Zoe and Evelyn. I hope that has been a useful background to the impact of COVID on our services and the impact on our expenditure levels. I thought that it would be, yes, if we can move on to the next slide, Magda, that would be great. Thank you. I thought it was important to set our £12.7 million underspend in a Scotland-wide context, and we can see here that there are 28 IGBs reporting underspends for 2021 of between 1 million and 55 million. And that it is significantly driven by those Q4 Scottish Government allocations to fund specific priorities and COVID spend in future years. It's also driven by operational underspends, and very similar to us, it's driven by slippage in investments and new models, temporary reduction in service provision and increased recruitment timescales. And I think it is important for IG members to understand that the issues that we faced are very much reflected by across Scotland in all health and social care partnerships. Across Scotland, reserves have increased overall from 139 million to 556 million, but the vast majority of those reserves are fully earmarked. And that across Scotland, despite those reserves, and similar to us, recurring financial sustainability is now a significant risk, with us all now having to look at completely refreshed 3-year financial plans that take into account the learning from COVID and trying to make sense of what the future now holds. If I can ask for the final slide and just bring us back to the IGB's reserves position, that significant movement in reserves of 12.7 million brings our overall reserves balance to 13.9 million moving into 21-22, but I thought it was important to understand that almost all of those reserves are earmarked, either earmarked as part of the financial plan for 21-22 to bring financial balance, earmarked to ensure that any additional COVID spend is covered, or earmarked to ensure that we can deliver on all of the many Scottish Government priorities that are now set out for us to deliver on for 21-22. So effectively, we can see from this slide that out of 13.9 million, the only reserve that is not fully ring-fenced for future spend is the operational surplus for social care, of amount of 2.9 million, of which 1.7 million is fully ring-fenced in the financial plan. So there is a level, of a very small level of reserves not currently earmarked, and everything else is set against future year spending commitments. I think it's worth saying that alongside every other IGB, we face a very challenging environment in terms of developing a financial plan for the next 3 years, a very uncertain planning environment, and certainly very limited reserves in which to support our financial position moving forward. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions on the presentation or indeed on the report.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thanks also to Evelyn and Zoe for their contributions. I think it's been helpful to see that set out in a written presentation that isn't too long. It's it just hits the right note and gives us the key figures. Before I move to questions, can I just record for the minute that the Vice Chair, Bob Benson, has now been able to join us. Bob, good afternoon. You're very welcome, and I'm glad that the support staff have been able to connect you or help connect you.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Okay, now I'm going to have to remember that in the chat that the gentleman whose equipment Maureen Summers is borrowing is in fact doesn't say Maureen Summers on it, so I apologise if I missed that going forward. Maureen, I'm happy to take a question from you as a substitute member.
In the last slide there, it's got the Scottish Government priorities, and there's 4.066 million. Is the extra money for mental health included in that? Because mental health isn't mentioned in any of them.
Thank you, Maureen. If you're referring to the new Scottish Government funding for renewal and recovery, the IGB has not had any indication yet of any share that it will receive of that funding. At this stage, the allocation has only been in respect of children and adolescent mental health services and other specific funding that's going directly to health boards. So we await that announcement, and certainly I hope that I would be able to bring an update to you on that at the next meeting.
Is there any mental health included in that, apart from the new money? Is there mental health included in that money then? 4.06 million?
There is a very small balance, Maureen, of Action 15 funding that is fully earmarked to support future year spending commitments in line with the agreed Action 15 investment plan.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions? There do not appear to be any further questions, so are there any comments on the report? No, there don't appear to be. Again, give it a few seconds. Okay, thank you, Jane, Evelyn and Zoe. Oh, that we have a comment. Sorry, I'm not sure who that is.
Thank you, Chair. It's Sarah Dickey.
I see, that's okay.
Hello, hi there. Yeah, my comment was how welcomed it was to receive the information on and receive assurance of the lack of impact on the quality of service delivered to patients. So in spite of underspend, it was good to hear Zoe report how the ways of working had been agile and modified to ensure that the people of Perth and Kinross received what they needed during that time. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. That's absolutely, I concur with that, Sarah, so thank you. If there are no further comments, therefore, can we agree to note this report? Take that as agreed unless anybody says otherwise. Thank you. Okay, so moving on therefore to item 6.2, which is an Audit and Performance Committee verbal update by the Chair of the Committee, Councillor Callum Purvis. Callum.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. So just to give an update on the previous meeting that we had of the Audit and Performance Committee, I'll just highlight a few of the areas that were covered at that meeting. We had a paper on the key strategic performance indicators, as we usually do. At the previous meeting, before the one we've just had, there was some concern raised about a couple of indicators where we were performing quite badly relative to the rest of Scotland. And we had asked for some work to be undertaken to identify why that might be, and whether there were any reasons for that that could explain the poor performance. So the first of which was about the rate of readmission within 28 days. And it has come to light that this is because of the way in which NHS Tayside records their data around readmissions. So it gives a slightly misleading picture in relation to our performance in that area. The other indicator was about the rate of falls for people who are over the age of 65. And it's still not entirely clear why this is the case, and there's further work ongoing to look at that. But I think it does give us some reassurance that when we were performing very well in a number of other areas, and these two seem to be outliers, that certainly in the case of one, that's been driven by the way that the data are being collected. And there were questions over whether NHS Tayside could align with the rest of Scotland in the way it collects the data, but I think that there is work ongoing nationally to see how we collect this performance information. So that's something that we will continue to monitor going forward. There was also the second time we had the full revised risk register, which incorporates both our previous risk register that we have of strategic risks and also the COVID-19 risk register as well. And for the first time we had the improvement plan attached to that, explaining what actions are being undertaken to ensure that those risks are mitigated and that we get those residual risk scores down to as low as possible. So that was pleasing to see, and we'll obviously be monitoring the progress of that going forward. And similarly, we had an update on the partnership improvement plan, which again showed good progress on the actions that have come out of various reports over the past few years. At this meeting, it was good to have 3 audit reports on a number of different areas, which we have been waiting for some time. The first one was on financial risks, and that set out the fact that there was good reporting to the IGB on financial risks, but we needed to show a better relationship between the financial reporting and also the specific financial risks, and that's something that is going to be included going forward in our financial update reports. And also a major one that should come as no surprise was about the relationships between partner bodies and a number of outstanding issues over things like risk sharing agreements that we are still working on. And the committee agreed to that I would write to NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council to highlight that while action has been taken by the Integration Joint Board in Perth and Kinross to progress some of these issues, that does require cooperation from our partner organisations. There was also linked to the improvement plan a report on improvement actions, which was very positive and showed great progress in these areas with very few issues. So that was very welcome. And then the final audit report was on provider sustainability payments, which was something that started at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have to obviously acknowledge that people were having to act at pace and get payments out very quickly to support people to ensure that they could continue to have the services that they relied on. But there were a few minor controls that should be put in place going forward to ensure that we're properly on top of those payments and making sure they're done in an appropriate way. So that was the 3 audit reports that we had. We also agreed to appoint the Chief Internal Auditor as Jackie Clark for a further year, but we have asked for some performance indicators around the internal audit function of the IGB to be developed so we can monitor progress more carefully going forward. And finally, we had the annual accounts, which we were able to consider, and we're happy to sign those off to be put to our external auditors. This was considered in conjunction with the governance statement, which again we were happy to sign off. The only area of concern that was raised, which had come up in some of the prior discussion, was again about the clinical care and professional governance reporting arrangements, which is still something that is outstanding, and we just need to make sure that if those arrangements are not in place by the time that the governance statement is finally signed off with the final accounts, that we reflect that in the governance statement, because it's not clear at the moment that that is the case. Just very briefly, I'll touch on the report that we've got as well of the work of the Audit Performance Committee from the last year. It does show some significant progress that we've made in areas particularly like performance reporting, and that's something that we have worked on to ensure that members have the information that is available to them to scrutinise the performance and service delivery of the Integration Joint Board, and also having some of the audit reports coming forward has been welcome. There are a few areas that we still need to work on, and they're highlighted in the annual report as well. But I'm happy to take any questions either on the committee that we had or the annual report. And just to reiterate, as always, that all members of the Integration Joint Board, not just those who are on the Audit and Performance Committee, are welcome to come along and contribute to the discussion and questioning at the Audit and Performance Committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purvis, for your, as ever, comprehensive report on the affairs of what is a very important committee, the Audit and Performance Committee. And thank you to all members for the work they do. I know that there's considerable amount of work that goes on behind the scenes in terms of the work of that committee. And so thank you for that. Just for ease of minute taking and no other reason really, I wonder if in terms of the structuring of questions and comments, and I fully appreciate Callum giving presentations on 6.2 and 6.3 together, but just if possible, can we segregate questions first of all in relation to the verbal update that Callum has given us, and in that regard, I see Pat Kilpatrick. Pat, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a few points, Chair, and a question. The first point is that one of the issues that was raised at the meeting was the lack of a primary care estate strategy, not just for Perth and Kinross, but across NHS Tayside. And that manifested itself in one of the risks as being a risk to primary care or sustainability of primary care services because due to lack of suitable premises. And I feel, Chairman, that we have discussed this and we raised this at several meetings, and I think it's time that we set up a working group to look at, or the executive leadership team set up a working group to look at how the premises would be rated for primary care. What do GPs need, and what do we as a partnership need to maintain the sustainability of primary care? Because now under the GP contract we have far greater responsibilities for direct provision than we had previously. So it's put a big burden of responsibility onto the partnership. Now I know NHS Tayside have not got this, they don't have a strategy at the moment, but in order that we could get ahead of the game, because there is money to be had from Scottish Government, and that's been evidenced in the investment in other areas of Scotland, including Grampian and Glasgow and Lothian and Lanarkshire, and I could go on and on. But I felt maybe we should try and get ahead of this, Chair, and under the auspices of Callum and the Audit and Risk Group, set up a working group to say, well, what are our premises needs, and what are we going to need in the next 15 to 20 years to maintain the sustainability of our primary care services. Okay. That's my first question, Chair.
That's quite a substantive question, so maybe if we can just treat that.
Answer that, yeah, sure, of course.
And if I may, Callum, I know it's questions to you, but it might be appropriate here to come in with Gordon Patterson has offered to contribute his comments. Gordon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Pat, for the question. I mean, the question was directed towards Callum as the Chair of the Audit Performance Committee in relation to whether or not he would be minded to set up a group to progress this. I'd probably wish, though, to, if I can, intervene and say that we do have a primary care premises strategy and development. It was being led by our primary care manager, who unfortunately left the partnership 6 or 8 weeks ago. And this work is now going to be advanced by her successor. It's been led also by Hamish Dougal, the Associate Medical Director, who will be joining us to speak to the later report on the Primary Care Improvement Plan. And it may well be, Pat, that he would wish to provide some assurance to you on the work that is being progressed. You're absolutely right that it does place, the GMS contract does place significant additional responsibilities onto the NHS board for the provision of premises or the assignation of leases. Our strategy should enable the NHS board to better understand the levels of risk and exposure that the GP practices across Perth and Kinross are currently facing, in order that they can consider the extent to which primary care can become prioritised within the strategic asset management activity of the NHS board. At the moment, the focus of a lot of the attention, perhaps understandably, in relation to capital planning is on the acute hospital, and it will be important that we provide the information, the needs assessment and the analysis to enable NHS Tayside to reflect also on what needs to happen to support GP premises. So that work is underway. For a couple of reasons, it has been delayed. The new Director of Facilities in NHS Tayside, with whom I've had a couple of meetings, is very keen that we provide such a needs assessment, and that's underpinned by a clinical view on the future models and needs of primary care, taking into account the opportunities for use of digital. So we are working on this, and we'll be presenting it hopefully towards the end of the year in order that NHS Tayside can consider it alongside the other capital projects it would wish to invest in. Obviously also taking into account particular needs that are presented by Dundee and Angus. And those will have to be considered in an overview of the position across Tayside. But there are some areas that are becoming quite critical, and we would wish to advance them so that action can be taken. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Gordon. Callum, do you wish to add anything to that?
I think that's helpful from the Chief Officer, but I do appreciate the concerns that Mrs Kilpatrick has highlighted, and perhaps we can have a report, whether that's to the next Audit and Performance Committee or to the IGB, perhaps, Chair, we can discuss that, just setting out the current position, what work is currently underway, and then either the Audit and Performance Committee or the Integration Joint Board can determine whether they feel that is sufficient, and what additional information that they would require to be assured of the work that is being undertaken and that addresses the concerns that have been raised.
Yeah, I'm happy to further discuss that with you offline, and we can take that forward if that gives you some degree of assurance, Pat, that this is a work in progress, delayed, as Gordon said, by the departure of the person doing the work and awaiting a replacement. Is that okay with you? You happy with that?
Yeah, I'm happy. I think it's a helpful suggestion that Callum could perhaps pursue this under Audit and Performance, because I think it needs to be picked up and be on the agenda. We don't want to be here in another 6 months saying, oh, they the middle of next year. We want to be able to be assured, I think, Chair, that there is sufficient progress. I understand the difficulties with staffing, but money is being allocated to boards for primary care improvement for premises development, and we are not getting any of that funding because we are not submitting business cases. So that was my issue. My second issue, and Callum is familiar with this as well and raised it at Audit and Performance, is the decisions or the discussions that we've had about the care governance reporting. And in fact, at the last meeting, there was a report that came forward that said it was reported to the IJB, which then had to be changed because, in fact, no care governance reports coming to the IJB. Now, again, this could be well handled through Audit and Performance. And in fact, I've done a bit of a review of how other partnerships report care governance, and a number of them do report it through their Audit and Performance Committee. So again, I feel that we need to be assured, Chair, that there is going to be some action on this. I'm aware of all the good work that's going on in Perth and Kinross, and I've seen that through the Care Governance Committee of NHS Tayside, but I don't see any of it coming to the Integrated Joint Board, and I think it's a very important aspect of our accountability and responsibility to the people of Perth and Kinross that we are assured by that. So I'd like to see that being picked up, Chair, and again, I'm happy to pick it up under Callum's chairmanship.
Okay, as I say, what I want to do is to take this discussion, and both these points are I think in the same category. I think I want to take this point, the whole matter of the governance around this, to a discussion, and I would like to involve the Vice Chair as well, Bob Benson, in such a discussion, so that we get everything a properly joined up and fully considered approach to both of the issues you raise, and I know you've raised them previously, Pat, and your points are noted, and it's not that they're being delayed by any other reason other than the circumstances that have arisen with the departure of key members of staff from the Health and Social Care Partnership. But it does need to be picked up, and it does need to be scrutinised by IJB members, and the question does become whether this is something for Audit and Performance Committee, or whether it's the IJB, and I would prefer to take that discussion offline and have a meeting involving myself, the Vice Chair, Callum, Councillor Purvis, and Gordon Patterson, which we'll endeavour to undertake as soon as possible after recess. So thank you for your questions.
I wonder if I can come back in, Chair, there. I'm happy for you to take it offline. I have brought it up on very many occasions now, and we haven't seen any progress, but I'm happy for you to take it offline. I do think it would be a good signifier of our effectiveness as a partnership if partnership member, IJB board members, were asked how they think best report care governance. It's not just the health aspect, it's the social care as well. So I think, once you've come up with proposals, that's fine. But I think there's a step before that, Chair, where we ask people what they think they feel most comfortable with. Because if you sit on the IJB board, you've already accepted certain responsibilities and accountabilities. And I think people should have a say in how they feel their accountabilities and responsibilities are discharged.
Your points are noted. Councillor Purvis.
Sorry, it was just very briefly to say, and I appreciate you say you wanted to take some of this offline, and perhaps also it might be discussed under the next governance paper as well, as I know that it is alluded to. If it's the decision of the Integration Joint Board that reporting for clinical care and professional governance should go through the Audit and Performance Committee, I don't have any issue with that, and I'm more than happy to facilitate that through the committee. It was just to reiterate that while I know we've talked about various factors, COVID and staffing changes, there was a decision taken in November 2018 to set up this committee, as far as I am aware, there was actually a pre-agenda meeting held and a date of the meeting was set. Now, for other factors that we don't need to go into, that didn't happen. But the point was, we were at the stage of we could have had that committee set up and functioning. Now, I know there are different views on whether that was the right forum or not, but that was the decision of the board. So I think that we were at the stage where that could have been progressed, but for other reasons it wasn't. And I know obviously there have been other factors later on in terms of COVID and staffing changes, but I think that, you know, we're talking about now, you know, over 2 years on, we still haven't got that assurance through one means or the other, whether it's a separate committee, whether it's the Audit and Performance Committee, or whether it's the Integration Joint Board. And I think Mrs. Kilpatrick raises a very valid point in that regard.
No, I note both your comments. I do wonder whether the discussion that we have had, and there's obviously no need to repeat it again this afternoon, but it's probably more suited to item 6.4 that we're just coming to in the agenda, rather than questions to Councillor Purvis about the report that he has actually given. So, you know, we'll park that discussion for now, and we can resurrect in the context of item 6.4 on today's agenda as appropriate, and take matters forward from there. Are there any further questions to Councillor Purvis? It appear to be, or any comments? No, thank you. Well, thank you again, Callum, for your verbal update, which is appreciated, and thanks for the work that you and your committee colleagues do. And just again for the minute, just in terms of 6.3 and the Audit and Performance Committee annual report, which Councillor Purvis covered in his presentation a few minutes ago. Are there any questions or comments on that report? Okay, don't appear to be. Thank you again, Callum, for that report once again. Okay, so moving on, therefore, to the next item on the agenda, which is item 6.4, which is standing orders and decision making, which, as I say, we have to some extent strayed into already. And if I can ask the clerk to the board, Scott Henry, to present his paper, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just briefly introduce the report. Members will be aware from previous discussions at both the board level and development sessions about discussions surrounding decision making and the standing orders of the board. The standing orders themselves state they're to be reviewed annually. Due to delays in being able to look at this through development sessions as part of the response to COVID, it was agreed to form a short-lived working group involving members of the board along with officers to look at both the standing orders and the wider decision-making. Meetings of this group took place in June and October 2020, and as members will see in the appendices to the report, the notes of these meetings are available. Further discussions then took place at future development sessions, and as the report states, there are current high-level reviews ongoing, both in terms of the review of the integration scheme for the board, and at a national level, the Scottish Government proposals for a national care service, and there are ongoing discussions around them. Therefore, it was felt in discussion with members of the working group and yourself and the Vice Chair that officers bring forward proposals first to focus on the limited chances at present, limited changes at present on areas such as board membership, the role of subcommittees and working groups, and as well as general meeting arrangements. So as members will see, there are a number of proposals within the report, and I'm happy to take any questions myself, but it may also be that yourself, Chair, and the Vice Chair along with other officers, may also want to take questions.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for your report. As previously indicated, the points raised by Mrs. Kilpatrick a few minutes ago are the subject of this paper at 3.2 to some extent. The discussion already had is noted, and we and will be minuted accordingly. But other than that, do we have questions? And we have one from Councillor Purvis, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just on the meeting arrangement section of the report, and so there's two parts to this. The first one is about the fact that the current meeting arrangements are remaining in place. So I assume that means that the current timetable. I note that from the minute of the working group that both or most of the members involved in that seem to be indicating that they would like more and shorter meetings or more focused agendas. So it's just why that was the outcome. So that's the first question. The second question, again on agenda setting, it talks about the strategic planning group and the role that they might have in assisting the setting of agenda management. I'm just wondering if you could perhaps expand on what that would involve.
Okay, I think perhaps a mix here of Scott and Gordon Patterson would be able to respond most appropriately to your question. Scott?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off, and as I say, Gordon may want to come in. In terms of the meeting arrangements, there was discussion about increasing the number of scheduled meetings of the board per year. However, subsequent discussions was also thinking about what business was coming before the IGB in terms of its decision making, and taking the opportunity to look at what that business would be, because with a view to, obviously we've had a number of lengthy meetings of the board, and therefore the rationale is to potentially increase the number of scheduled meetings that we have to deal with that. But I think it was an opportunity to look at the volume and the type of business that was coming before the board. But Gordon may want to expand on that.
Thank you, Scott. No, I have nothing particular to add to that. I think it was about the extent to which everything that the IGB may wish to consider could usefully be considered in the context of a formal IGB meeting, and the opportunity that is presented to provide briefings out with the meeting in order to support agenda management. I think increasingly we are keen to try to ensure that the IGB is able to focus on its strategic priorities and the delivery of the strategic commissioning plan, rather than necessarily operational updates. And we would be minded to try to get to a position where the IGB are being provided with the opportunity to discuss in formal meetings those matters that require formal approval or decision, and some of the other information that might otherwise have taken up IGB time can be shared for information either at the meeting or out with the meeting. So I think those were the considerations. Obviously, I speak from a perspective of not having been involved in the group, not having been party to the discussions. It was very much an IGB member-led group, so it may well be that participants on that group may well be able to provide a bit more information. In terms of Councillor Purvis, on your question about the strategic planning group, I think the ambition in relation to the strategic planning group is to provide a very robust sense check, a critical friend in relation to programmes, plans and strategies that are being worked up and developed by the Health and Social Care Partnership. Prior to those being finalised and prior to those coming to the IGB for approval. So there is a very broad section of stakeholders involved in the strategic planning group, and I shall be reporting on that at the next item. And in order to ensure that the IGB were only reviewing papers that were at that stage where a decision was needed, the SPG, the Strategic Planning Group, provides that sort of sounding board, sense check, challenge back to the Health and Social Care Partnership, back to officers, to ensure that the final draft of strategies that are coming to the IGB for approval have been informed by very effective engagement with the relevant stakeholders, with the third sector, with people with lived experience and their carers.
Thank you, Gordon. Does that answer your question satisfactorily, Councillor Purvis?
Yes, Chair. I do have a couple of comments on that, but I'll reserve that for the appropriate point.
Okay. And can I therefore bring in Councillor McDade?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, if I can go through them sort of one at a time. Absolutely agreed on 3.1. I don't think there was any disagreement around that within the working group. I think everyone has generally been supportive of that position, so quite happy with the idea of increasing it to two reps. I think that makes sense, and I would like us to also consider lobbying at a national level for them to have voting rights. So that was previously discussed, and it's not. There is this work that's going on at national level, and I think we should support our public partner reps in that, and that they should have a vote. But I appreciate that it is not within our gift, despite my attempts at creative ways of giving them voting rights. On 3.2 subcommittees, I don't necessarily agree around this because the board has agreed to establish a clinical care and professional governance committee, and some of us were appointed onto that committee, were invited to the meeting of that committee, and it was cancelled at the last minute, and we were told it was going to be rescheduled shortly, and it's never been rescheduled. But the board did have a great discussion about this, decided we required one, and one was supposed to be held. The position of the board has never changed. Now, the membership of the board has changed, and some of the newer members of the board might not necessarily agree with the previous decision of the board. However, the current position of the board still remains that we should have a clinical care and professional governance committee, and therefore I think we should just go ahead and proceed on that basis. We have kicked this one down the road for years at this point, 2 years almost to be exact, because I think it was supposed to be 2 years ago in August that we were supposed to have the meeting of it. So I really think that we should proceed, and as has been outlined, there are things that it could be looking at. In terms of the BRG process, I am not particularly satisfied around the argument for reducing the IGB BRG meetings this year was the COVID pressures on officers. That is not what's reflected in this report. This report says something different. It says that the Head of Finance and Corporate Services now has full responsibility for fiscal management support for all budgets, and therefore the BRG process was significantly streamlined. That was not the reasoning we did it, and it was not what we agreed as a board. We agreed as a one-off to reduce the number of meetings to support our officers who were dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. The two things are not what was agreed previously. What this report says is not what we agreed. So I don't agree with that, and I actually don't think that. I think the previous year's processes have been more productive. I appreciate that the situation this year meant that we had to reduce the number of meetings, but I didn't think it was particularly conducive to getting broad agreement. And the only reason in my view, worked as well as it did this year is because there was very little changes because it was effectively a year 2 budget and we weren't putting anything else in. So I'm not necessarily in agreement with that part of the paper. In terms of meeting arrangements, I raise this every board meeting that I think we need more meetings scheduled, and therefore I think that should be reflected, but that's again something that I think we need to have a proper discussion with as a board. Here we are today to have this discussion, I think, hopefully, and I for one think we have far too much crammed into meetings and we don't get to give them the proper care and attention they deserve in a lot of cases. In relation to the standing orders, I would like the clerk to outline what they mean by a revised wording, simplify the process for motions and amendments, because I felt it's fairly straightforward, but just want to understand what that means. I'd like to also understand what they mean by process for urgent emergency meeting arrangements, as in what particular situations are we outlining here? Are we outlining business continuity situation? Are we outlining an urgent meeting position? What exactly is being proposed there? I agree around further clarity in terms of the process for proxy members and changes in membership and the vacancies. Currently the 1 month thing has been an issue, particularly with significant number of changes on the NHST side and the issues there have, but also on the council side on occasion. So I think that would be beneficial. And I agree with the deputations and petitions. I think we were all in agreement on that one, so that's not particularly contentious, but I would like to understand some answers to those questions, please.
Okay, thank you for your comments there. And again, before I bring in Scott Henry and Gordon Patterson to answer your questions substantively, I would just make the observation that as we will find out, no doubt, at the next item on the agenda, that there are a number of additional staffing pressures on the executive team at the Health and Social Care Partnership, which we do need to factor in to our considerations. I'll just make that single comment just now. Obviously, we'll come to that in due course in the meeting, but can I bring in Scott and/or Gordon, whoever wants to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Gordon will want to come in on a number of areas, and the Chief Finance Officer will want to comment on the budget review process. In relation to Councillor McDade's questions about the standing orders, for clarity, yeah, on the urgent business, that was reflecting on the last sort of year and a half, and when we were in a situation due to COVID where we had to move from sort of physical meetings that were taking place and move to virtual meetings. The current standing orders of the board don't have any written reference to how that is to happen, and that could be that in the future that's to do with something like a national pandemic or another sort of business continuity issues. I think it would be helpful to get some wording and agreements set down in writing as part of the standing orders, so that we're clear on that. And I'm happy to bring proposals for IGB members to consider, as part of a revision to the standing orders. Similar on motions and amendments. The standing orders were first written at the inception of the board, and were sort of heavily in line with not only the national legislation, but as the initial clerk to the board was, like myself, from Perth and Kinross Council, they do build on the council standing order. So I'm happy to look at other standing orders, whether it be for IGBs and other partner bodies, and to make them as simple as possible. as we know, in the spirit of the IGB, we don't set out to have motions, amendments or votes, but if we are going to do that, I think we want to set that out as streamlined as possible. In relation to the comments about the setting up of the Clinical Care Professional Governance Committee, that's a matter for the IGB to consider in terms of discharging its duties in the integration scheme, to be satisfied that the correct arrangements are in place. The previous decision was to set up a formal committee like the Audit and Performance Committee, but it's a matter for the board whether it wants to continue with that format or look at direct reporting to the IGB. And as this report sets out, officers are carrying out a piece of work to look into how recommendations to bring back as part of a report to a future meeting. I'll pass over to Gordon and Jane now if they want to make any further comments.
Thank you. Are we having Gordon? Can you hear us, Gordon?
It has frozen.
That's it. We've got you back now, I think.
Okay. My screen's frozen, but I shall respond. I mean, this is a paper. Voting members or members of the IGB had a working group that considered a number of matters, and this is a summary of some of the ways in which those matters may well be taken forward. So it's really for the IGB members to debate and discuss and determine how to move forward. In terms of clinical care governance, I think, as this paper says, we intend to do some more work. We've had some preliminary discussions with the Council's monitoring officer. We've reviewed getting it right for everyone. We are acutely aware of what it says in the integration scheme, and our intention probably moving forward would be to provide assurance to the Audit and Performance Committee of the IGB on matters to do with clinical and professional care governance. The IGB will wish to be assured that NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council and officers of the Health Board and the Council are exercising their responsibilities and are able to assure the IGB in relation to professional matters to do with social work, social care, nursing, clinical matters and medical and allied health profession. So I think probably what we would be looking to do in relation to clinical and care governance is to bring a report to the Audit and Performance Committee, and that is probably better able to be achieved now that the NHS board is minded to move to a position where the reports that we take to the NHS board will no longer be considered as reserved matters and will be in the public domain. So that would be how we would propose to bring forward. But as the report says, we need to take further discussions, and as Pat Kilpatrick says, we have taken a view in relation to what happens elsewhere, although we are aware that Perth and Kinross IGB has a fairly unique position as a strategic planning and commissioning body, rather than one that's responsible for clinical and professional governance and operational delivery. So in that regard, that would be what I would offer to the IGB in terms of some reassurance about future plans. I think it might be the case that Jane would wish to say something about the budget review group process and how we can support the IGB in a way that is proportionate and enables them to be actively involved in some of the discussions about the budget, expenditure, pressures, savings moving forward routinely. So Jane, I'll pass to you in that regard, please.
Right.
Thank you, Gordon. I guess the first point I would want to make is how valuable to me as Chief Financial Officer the Budget Review Group has been. That is not in any doubt to me, and certainly under scrutiny of external audit, and in relation to good governance, we describe the role of that group and the very valuable contribution that it makes. However, the other side of that is the fact that we have a risk sharing arrangement that hasn't moved forward, that still puts an enormous burden on the team, not just the finance team, but the service teams, to deliver effectively 2 parallel budgets that you know, creates enormous work. So we have to find a middle ground that is proportionate, that contributes the same value in terms of the detailed understanding of our members of the financial position and their ability to influence it. We sit between Perth and Kinross Council, who have an absolutely very detailed machine that supports budget setting, and an NHS Tayside, who is quite frankly at the opposite end of the scale. And what I'm proposing in this paper is that we find a middle ground that allows the contribution of members, that is sustainable by the finance team, but also recognises that we are still in the middle of a pandemic response, and that isn't going to go away anytime soon. So we need to find something that is proportionate but still effective, and what I have set out there, I hope, will allow us to achieve that. If members feel that that isn't going to meet their needs, then I would suggest that we are looking at additional resources to support a more comprehensive process, both in the finance team, but potentially also in the service team, in order to be able to meet the needs, the detailed needs of members if they require a full programme of BRG meetings.
Thank you, Jane. That's very helpful, and Gordon and Scott too. Councillor McDade, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, thanks. I think you got answers to most of my points there. Although this is an officer paper that's been brought forward, so whilst you know, also those answers where this is a decision for the board, and I agree it's an officer paper that's been brought forward, so I'm asking why some of these things are in the report in the way that they are. And you know, I agree with Jane's point about the officer resources under pressure and the pandemic is ongoing. That's not what the paper says, however. That's not the rationale that's been given for the streamlined process. And I don't actually disagree with the Chief Financial Officer that more resources are required, and in fact I've been very consistent in my 4 years on the board that I think more resources, particularly in finance, is required. I think we did request previously and succeeded in getting some additional financial support, and I'm very happy to advocate strongly that we ask for more. I have no issue with that, because you know, the responsibility of the IGB is strategic in commissioning, and the significant way we do that is a significant part of how we do that is through the direction of resources, and for that, really, a lot of the work the BRG does has been to get a consensus in advance of the meeting, and I think personally the board has become more divided in the last 2 years, and I would suggest that's the 2 years where we haven't been meeting at the regularity that we were, particularly when we were having regular BRG meetings, where we were getting a lot of consensus in those meetings, and we were having quite open and frank discussions, and often meetings we're having in these meetings are not achieving a consensus, and I think that's unfortunate and helpful, and I don't want us to lose one of the key areas where we are getting consensus. So I'm quite happy that we add in a recommendation, for example, that we ask for more financial resourcing. I think that's perfectly appropriate. In terms of the risk sharing agreement, again, this is something I've raised, I think, in almost every IGB meeting we've ever had, pretty much, and initially there was reluctance on the council's part, but for the last 3 years it's basically been NHS Tayside that have been, you know, stopping adding this in with the review of the integration scheme, but we have to get some significant movement on these things. Fundamentally for the integration of health and social care to progress in any meaningful way, as outlined, we're currently doing 2 budgets. We need to resolve this issue, and I would ask the chair of the IJB write again to the parent bodies to express our urgent desire to see this resolved. I don't know how many letters that will make at this point, but I think it should be recorded again. So quite happy to recommend that we ask for more staffing resource. In terms of the standing order response from the clerk, I'm still not actually clear on whether he is referring to equivalent of a virtual meetings protocol or whether he's talking about new powers for the chair. That's something I would like clarity on, because there's a big difference, in my opinion, on which of those are being proposed. And the advice the members were given was that everything during the COVID pandemic was in line with standing orders, when some of us did express concern around that. So I'm not quite, can understand we might want a bit more clarity, but if we're creating a whole new process, it would suggest that what happened last year wasn't in line with the current standing orders, which we were told it was. So if I could get some clarity on those points, I'd be very grateful.
Thanks. Scott, are you able to come back in on Councillor McDade's latter points there?
Yeah, happy to clarify. In terms of the arrangements that we've had for the previous years, but whilst we have been in line with the current standing orders, I think there's initially, as with a lot of public sector bodies who hadn't planned for a global pandemic, there was a lot of discussion that took place and email communication. And I think it would be helpful that we build on the experience of the past year and a half and the best practice that we've developed. I think that in terms, it would be a decision for the board as to when, in line with kind of government guidance, we return to whether it be physical meetings or a form of hybrid meetings or virtual meetings. I think it would be helpful that we flesh out the standing orders to have all eventualities covered. And I'd be keen to get your views from people across the board in terms of their other involvements with other public sector agencies about how best we do that. And I think this was just a desire to plan ahead for any eventualities in the future, so that we are clear if a set of circumstances come into force. We've got a clear understanding as a board how we will continue to meet and discharge the functions of the board. But for clarity, that there wasn't any move to give the chair or any other member any other power. It was more just to clarify in terms of how we would sort of run the meetings, and whether that be an appendix to the standing orders with a virtual protocol, or whether we weave it into the standing orders themselves if the board feels that we will be moving to more of a hybrid model. Then that's fine. But I'm happy to present some proposals and ideas, and it's for the board to determine how best it wishes to do that.
Thank you for that, and I hope that answers your questions. For now, Councillor McDade will come back to trying to tie this all together at the end of the discussion. But if
I think Jane Smith was going to comment as well.
Oh, I'm not seeing that. Okay, Jane, do you want to comment at this point?
Yes, just very briefly. I did think it was important just to come back briefly on a couple of points that Xander has made. First of all, you're absolutely right, Xander, that the work of the BRG in the past years has brought members together in a very kind of collegiate way. However, I would be concerned if that was seen as the main vehicle for driving collaborative working. We now have a strategic planning group that should be a focal point for bringing people together to decide on the future plans. And whilst the budget process is there too, I'm not sure that it should be seen as the central focal point for bringing together you know, the IJB members. However, I accept that it has played a valuable role in the past. The other point I really do need to make is that our strong integrated finance team at the moment is supporting the service in the IJB well. I think it will support a proportionate BRG process well. What I'm saying is that if members decide that they want you know, a much more intensive BRG process, then yes, that will require additional resource, but I don't believe at this stage that that would be the right answer.
Okay, thank you, Jean, for your answer just now. And if I can now move on to the next question, which was from Mr. Benson. Bob.
Thank you, Chair. And my question was kind of posed earlier on, but in light of the discussion we've had, kind of rethinking some of this. First of all, I wanted to say is I was really pleased with the guidance document that came out from the clerk and from Jane. I just thought it was a superb document, and it's been shared with all of the other IJBs across Tayside because of the quality of the document itself. So I'm really pleased about that. It's a great reference point for all board members. And I think one of the things that's really come up for me is just how we need to focus on strategic planning and commissioning rather than the operational and the processes. And for me, this will be one of the key considerations over the autumn period up to when the clerk will report back, is how we actually address this formally and make some real decisions about things like the care governance group, for example. But it's clear that we need much more time on this. But I think my more substantive point is about living with COVID. Our communities are living with COVID. Our health and social care partnership staff and others are living with COVID. And we need to proof this throughout all of our work at governance level to ensure that we're actually able to do what we aspire to. And one of the things I would be clearly looking at is how do we actually support our members through this period? Members are not doing the normal things that they would do during this period about engaging around boardrooms and able to speak in other places. And that's one of the things that we need to look at again in terms of how we can protect these areas that we ensure we're not losing people in this difficult time. So I really want to support the proposals in the paper, but I would also want over the interim to look at how we can COVID-proof fully our governance arrangements so we can focus on what exactly the board is really here for, where we can excel. And for me, that's about ramming home our work on strategic planning and commissioning. I respect all the other views, but it's also worth saying is that we're already going through big arrangements for the actual adult social care reform, which could have a profound effect on what we do. And also we're already working on the review of integration. So I'm kind of hoping that members will appreciate just what needs to be done. But it's also worth saying is our staff are exhausted.
No,
and we need to just really remember that.
Thank you, Bob, and you know, I associate myself with the comments that have been made by yourself there. I have to say, concerned about the pressures on the small team that we have. They are unrelenting, and I'm sure Gordon will cover this in his report later on. But you know, I think it's important to for everybody to understand that if we were to rely simply on what we watch on TV, and of course I'm not suggesting that the members do that, but if we were to, we could be forgiven for thinking that we're 20 days away from the end of the pandemic, and everything is back to normal. And it may well be that our hospitals aren't, hopefully are not inundated. with further cases, and that the number of hospitalisations is mercifully few. But the pressure is absolutely full on in the community as a result of the increases in transmission that we're seeing currently, and more today. So we do need to recognise that on the staff of the partnership, that that this is unrelenting pressure when we're making our decisions. Now, having said all that, I do understand the understandable desire to put this to bed. We did have the working group, which came up with some joint recommendations, but not on all areas by any means. And so that didn't really take us where we wanted to be before the pandemic struck. And obviously things have been delayed further during the pandemic. And that's unfortunate, but that's just where we are in terms of the pandemic. But I think, I'll summarise properly at the end of the discussions. But the areas of disagreement from speakers so far appear to relate to the BRG process and the clinical care governance reporting into the IJB, and certainly on the latter point, if it's acceptable, given the moving goalposts that we are dealing with just now in terms of the integration scheme, the risk sharing agreement, and the future direction of health and social care integration nationally, which is a government priority. I wonder whether the easiest thing in the interim, as Gordon has alluded to, is for future Audit and Performance Committee meetings to receive reports on clinical care and governance as part of its remit for the time being, pending further clarity on exactly the governance structure that we are heading towards as part of the national review. And on the BRG side of things, I agree with Councillor McDade in what he said, that it was an opportunity to get into a very small warm room, if you remember, without windows opening, to sit around the table and thrash out the detail of each line of the budget. That can't happen just now, won't happen in the foreseeable future, and so we need to be realistic that in terms of the level of detailed input that we as elected members can have. I want us to have as much detailed input as possible without overburdening the staff for the reasons previously outlined. So I think if we, I think we can come to some sort of compromise in terms of the BRG process that we're about to enter into in the autumn into the winter, and it is an important BRG process, so there will need to be much consultation. But I think we need to be pragmatic about it and try and find some sort of halfway ground that doesn't overburden officers but does satisfy members. So that's my own observations at this point in time. Sorry for my rambling. So just coming back to the questions list at the moment, we have Maureen Summers. Maureen, you have a question.
Just under the section, I'm going to get this up on my iPad again, under the arrangements for the agenda setting, at the moment, well, under that section says that the SPG has recently been set up. There was a meeting on the 15th of June, and that there was there'll be carer and public partner representation there, and that this group will hopefully influence the agenda for the IGB meetings. But is there also an IGB setting group that actually sets the agenda, and is the intention to have carer and public partner representation on that group?
I'm muted.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I heard the question. Not sure I completely understood the question, but I think, are you asking?
Well, I've maybe picked it up wrong.
At the moment, or
I've maybe picked it up wrong, but I gather from what's said there that the SPG was recently set up again after it being so for about the last year or two, and included in that are public partners and carers. And this group seems to have, it states that there'll be discussions about influencing the agendas for the IGB meetings. Now, that is to influence, the discussions will influence the agenda, but is there also, as there has been in the past, an agenda setting committee that sets the agenda? And will there be a public partner and carer rep on that agenda setting committee?
Well, Gordon might want to come in, but at this time and for the duration of the IGB to date, that agenda setting process is basically aligned to the same process that is used both in NHS Tayside and in Perth and Kinross Council, where the agenda is set through consensus among the chair, the vice chair, the chief officer in the case of the IJB, the chief finance officer, and others as necessary. But this is a discussion that takes place 4 to 6 weeks ahead of each IJB, where we reflect on the discussions that have taken place at the previous IJB and on any developments such as the strategic planning group that may have met, and and I think what is intended here is that the strategic planning group, which is an integral part of this whole process and needs to become more and more embedded in the process, needs to have dialogue with either with the chair or with the chief officer or chief financial officer, in order to ensure that the SPG's priorities are included in the next IJB meeting. We're not trying to necessarily expand the membership of the budget setting group. It's a quick informal meeting, something not so quick, that just seeks to bring together all the inputs that we get from the various meetings that have taken place and try to shape the agenda. I don't know if that answers your question or if you need any further clarity, Maureen.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's just I didn't realise it was such a very small committee. There's only the 4 of them, and that. But the fact that the SPG members can actually put forward if there's something they strongly want to be included in the agenda, that they have a vehicle to do that they can actually get someone from the SPG to liaise with the
100%
small committee. Yes.
100%, and you'll have gathered from others who have asked questions, made comments already today, that there is absolutely no pushback whatsoever to increased representation on committees by our public partners, which is why let's be honest here. I used to have an issue trying to run meetings the way they're supposed to be run, and have all of the public partners or all of able to contribute. Now that's gone. There's I'm in no way trying to silence Henry. We absolutely want your input. 100% want your input, and we want more of it. And further to what Councillor McDade has said, we absolutely want you to have a vote. Should anything ever come to a vote, a formal vote, we absolutely want that to be the case. And I think it's only right, and that there will undoubtedly very soon be meetings with the new Cabinet Secretary as we take forward the integration process, and that point will be made forcibly. I can assure you of that, and I'm sure Mr. Benson will concur with that. That sentiment as well. So I hope that gives you some assurance. So I'm seeing Pat Kilpatrick, you no longer have a question. That's correct. So
it was just one very brief thing, Chair, and that was what is the membership of the strategic planning group? I couldn't find that anywhere in any of the papers, so I wasn't sure who was on the strategic planning group.
Right, can somebody assist me with either Gordon or Scott, can assist me with the membership of that group?
Yeah, as we move on to the next section of the agenda, Chair, which is probably the more important business to do with the delivery of activities in pursuit of the IGB's strategic objectives and improving outcomes for citizens in Perth and Kinross. I'll give a verbal update on the strategic planning group. The membership is, as was included in the papers at the last IGB. I wouldn't propose to read out all 25 members of the strategic planning group, but the majority are stakeholders, third sector, independent sector, public partners, providers of services, independent contractors, etc. So we can provide information again to the IGB in that regard. But
it was more, Gordon, are there any members of the IJB on the strategic planning group? It's just a yes or a no.
Yes.
Right, that's fine.
Non-voting members.
It's just non-voting members that are on the strategic planning group. There's no voting members.
Yes.
Right.
Can I just come in briefly, Pat and Gordon? The induction guide that was sent round, Pat, sets out very clearly the membership that strategic planning groups are required to have. That's set out by the Scottish Government. Now we can supplement that, but as Gordon said, that was provided. Our actual membership in line with that guidance was brought to the last meeting and is very much in line with what is set out effectively in legislation in terms of membership. So if you want to refer to your induction guide, that gives a very clear outline.
That's helpful, Jane. I just do wonder, Chair, why we have got no voting members of the IJB on anything that's as important as the strategic planning group. If we have the capacity to include additional people, I personally think that would be quite an important. I'm on the budget review group and I don't have any issue with that. I think it works pretty well as it is, but I do think that we should have some voting members of the IJB on the strategic planning group. I see that as a very important group. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for your comments. So Councillor McDade, you had another question, oblique comment, or both?
No, I've got both. I've got a question, and then I'm happy to come back for a comment after Councillor Purvis has had his comment, and anyone else as well. If I can ask my question, which is for the Chief Financial Officer, in terms of I think we're all absolutely in agreement that they're all under significant pressure, and we're all very much grateful for the hard work of the past year. But that doesn't get away from the fact that I think we do need to be reassured that we have all the information we need and that we're getting appropriate scrutiny and governance, and that us as board members feel confident that we can discharge our responsibilities and functions as the legally responsible members of the board, and therefore I'd like to understand from her what sort of additional resource she would require to ensure that we could service BRGs in the way that previously they were serviced, and then I would seek your support, Chair, to seek that additional resource.
Thank you, Xander. If I could clarify, first of all, that the level of resource and support that's required is not just about the finance team. That is one element, and it is an important element. But perhaps the most important element is the support that is required from our heads of service and from their service teams. I think perhaps what's not understood is the level of work that is required behind the scenes for every single meeting. And what the proposal today does is try to make a proportionate recommendation in terms of recognising the level of service team support that goes into making sure that we can come forward to these meetings on a regular basis. Now, we plan still to do so. We plan still to come forward to meetings, but what I think you would possibly also recognise over the last 12 months is we've had BRGs and we've had development sessions, and what's happened is those have actually duplicated work. They've duplicated the work of officers, including the service teams and of the members, in that much of the material that's brought to one is being brought to the other, and we need to find a way of bringing that together. So in answer to your question, it isn't about the finance team, it's about the service teams too. And I think what Gordon, or in fact what Eric outlined, was that we have a number of gaps in the service teams at the moment. We are still responding to the pandemic, but actually, even without that, what I think is that the proposal today is about proportionately recognising how best to support members in a way that takes into account best practice and the capacity of officers, but also of members, because we've had situations where members have struggled to attend a lot of BRG meetings, and that's possibly been on the NHST side of things, our non-executive members who have not been able to sustain a level of meetings. So my proposal is about looking at all of these things and coming up with a pragmatic recommendation, Councillor McDaden. So it's not about a level of finance resource per se, but about making this proportionate and pragmatic, taking into account service manager input that's required to these meetings also.
Okay, Xander, I hope that answers your question. So we have comments, and I think Councillor Purvis, you were first wishing to make a comment.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just if I can maybe summarise where I am on most of the points. Generally supportive of most of the recommendations in the report, as has been highlighted by others. I very much welcome the suggestion of increasing the membership of the service user public partner representatives from 2 to 4. I also think that it's perhaps something that could be considered, and we obviously have now for NHS, for council, and soon for public partners too, that it might be worth also having a public partner involved in the pre-agenda process. I know that this was something that did happen for a period under the previous chief officer, and particularly given the direction of travel with the Feely review, that might be something that is worth giving consideration. In terms of the various other groups that have been discussed, as I say, I'm not precious about the route for clinical care and professional governance, but I think it's really important that the IGB is assured in some way, shape or form. At the time when, as I say, there was a pre-agenda meeting on this committee and it was scheduled, I do recall that the agenda that was proposed was quite lengthy. So while I'm happy to consider it as part of the Audit and Performance Committee, that might mean that our agendas are even longer and more unworkable. I think my preference is still to continue to carry out the decision of the board as was previously decided, and have that separate committee. And I personally can't understand why that, given we had a pre-agenda meeting and there was a date set, why that could not now progress. It seems that other reasons are now being given when we were actually able to do that at the time, which I do find a bit disappointing. In relation to the BRG, I think I'm happy with the suggestion as is. What I would suggest as a sort of compromise position, and I have suggested this in the past, that perhaps we could have additional BRG meetings with members only, where members could discuss some of the proposals and then take any suggestions or further questions to officers. Again, this is something that happens in the council. I know there's a very different situation in the NHS, but if that might facilitate further discussion and collaborative working on those budget proposals without necessarily taking up further officer time. So I think there are perhaps ways of addressing some of the concerns that Councillor McDade has raised, because I do think it's a very important process to have. On the meeting arrangements, raised that point about whether we need more regular meetings, and note that that was something suggested by a couple of members during the working group. I think that was one of the few things that there was consensus on between Councillor McDade and Mr. Erskine. So it's interesting that that isn't a recommendation in the report. But I think that just on the SPG point, as I think Mrs. Summers has raised, obviously they have a really important role to play in ensuring that lived experience and people who have different perspectives on the services that we provide, either as carers or service users or service deliverers, that they can have direct input into the policies and the strategies that we bring forward. What I would say though is the Chief Officer mentioned about getting it to the stage at which strategies could be presented to the IGB for decision. And while obviously I'm very pleased that we now have IGB members, voting members as well on the SPG in an observer capacity, I have again raised this issue before, that I would like to ensure that IGB members can have input on these strategies at an early stage, because while it is very important to get all of the different perspectives, what I wouldn't want is that things are coming to the IGB as a fait accompli, and we need to make sure that, that we have input at an early stage, given that ultimately we're going to bear responsibility for these decisions. And on the standing orders, I'm happy to wait and see what the clerk brings back and then comment once we have a draft. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor McDade.
Thanks, Chair. I absolutely agree with Pat Kilpatrick and Councillor Purvis that we should have voting members on the strategic planning group as voting members. I think that the policy of the board should reflect the board, and I think this is my wider concern, is that I do not have confidence that we have the resourcing to provide the board with the information and the support we need to carry out our scrutiny and strategic direction role, as has been outlined by officers today effectively, and I would like it formally recorded in the minute that I have expressed that concern, because I do think this will come back at a future date. I think that there are a number of pragmatic ways that we can go about some of this, and I think Councillor Purvis' suggestion about having meetings with either no officers or very minimal officers around some of the BRG stuff is stuff that this is something we did before, and it worked fine. And for me, the fundamental thing here, whether it's the BRG or anything else, is that actually the voting members are not sitting down on a regular basis and having the big discussions that we need to be having, and that is leading to the situation we get to board meetings and the board is quite divided on issues, and we are kicking these issues down the road. Now, I am of the view that the clinical care and professional governance should meet. However, if it is not going to meet and we're going to put in alternative arrangements, those alternative arrangements should be put in place immediately, effectively, because this is something that has been ongoing for 3 years. It was supposed to meet 2 years ago for its first time, and it had already been getting discussed for about 18 months before that. So it's somewhere between 3 to 3.5 years this has been getting discussed as an issue that we identified, I think actually through an audit process potentially, but it certainly was identified as an issue 3 to 3.5 years ago. 2 years ago it was supposed to meet for the first time, and that was after a long period of discussion. It has not met as yet, despite having been agreed by the board and having membership appointed by the board. If we are going to go for a different route, I would ask, Chair, that as part of your recommendation today, that report or briefing note, whatever it is brought back at the meeting in September, and if there is no proposal brought back at that point that the board can agree on, that the Clinical Care and Professional Governance Group then meets, because I don't think that this is an ongoing situation that has been ongoing for far too long and unresolved for far too long, and we do have responsibilities that we need to discharge, and I'm not satisfied that we are discharging them or have the ability to. So I would ask that you consider that as an additional caveat in your recommendations. I'd also ask that you write to the relevant minister or appropriate body regarding the voting rights of public partners, as you indicated, support across the board for that. I would ask that you write formally on behalf of the board to express that support. I suppose my final concern around the standing orders, I will wait and see what is proposed back, but my concern is that if we do not believe that our current standing orders reflect the necessary responsibilities, we've waited quite a long time to make those urgent amendments effectively around business continuity, and I don't quite understand why we didn't bring those changes in advance of the onset of the pandemic. I'm the chair of a public board elsewhere. We met on the 3rd of March 2020 and implemented agreed new business continuity planning because of COVID. Now, given this board was discussing COVID in January and February, if we were concerned that we didn't have the appropriate arrangements in place, then I think we should have brought that to the attention, and we could have resolved it when we met on the 12th of March last year. But anyway, that is my position on this paper.
Thank you. Sandra Auld.
Thank you, Chair. So just very briefly, just to thank the board for the increase in representation of public partners and the recognition by the chair of the positive input that we're able to have. And just to refer to Councillor Purvis's comment regarding the suggestion of representation on the agenda setting group, I guess it's just to remind the board that in times gone by that there had been a previous invitation extended by a previous chair of the IJB for exactly that. So just to make the point that that isn't, although it's a very welcome suggestion, it's actually not a new suggestion, and it was one that had been extended but had never actually been implemented. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, I'd just like to try and sum up where we are, and see if we can get a consensus on where we've got to. I think that there is agreement on 3.1 on memberships, and in terms of the public partners of that, there is no doubt. There is obviously significant concerns continue to be expressed by Councillors Purvis and McDade in respect of the subcommittees and the minutes sorry, the agenda setting and the structure for the meetings in particular. And I think we as a board and the executive officer team need to reflect on what has been said today. I mean, we have in my time as chair, we have to some extent danced around this whole area, and thanks to Scott for bringing forward a paper that sought to give an interim report, if you want, on where we are. I'm acutely aware of, as I said earlier, the moving goalposts nationally, and things are changing, but I'm absolutely picking up of those that I've asked to speak, and Kilpatrick as well. Sorry, that you know, there is concern that there isn't sufficient opportunity for scrutiny by members of items that they would wish to scrutinise in order to be assured that everything is as it should be. And we we need to reflect on that. Detailed minutes will have been taken. Obviously, this meeting is being recorded, and what I propose to do myself is to listen back carefully to the points that have been made and any responses that are given, and also I have to say to listen to what is about to be said under the next item in the agenda, in terms of the work that the Health and Social Care Partnership is undertaking for the benefits of the people of Perth and Kinross. And I think I get the message. I really do get the message that has been expressed by Pat, Callum and Xander in particular, and the concerns that have been expressed. But I remain, as Bob Benson has also indicated, I remain acutely aware of the difficulties that increased meetings involving officers will cause these officers without any change. While the pandemic is ongoing and the aftermath is ongoing, I worry considerably about that pressure. So I do not propose to add to these pressures at the moment. I wouldn't support any move to add to these pressures, but I do want to acknowledge the concerns that have been expressed and give an assurance that over the summer that we will work on this. I would ask that an initial report is prepared for the Audit and Performance Committee on clinical care and governance to take forward that discussion at the next Audit and Performance Committee, and that will give some overview. I'm not talking about that being the end solution. I am talking about that as very much an interim situation, just so that we're not sitting on this over the summer months. We are actually preparing to present to members in September, if that's when the next meeting is. So with your forbearance, I would propose to conclude there and give assurances that further debate will take place between now and the next meeting. And while speaking, I'm trying to first of all read Gordon's comments in the chat. This is regarding the strategic planning group. And in that regard, clearly I attended some, but not all. I couldn't attend all of that meeting in the 15th of June, and voting members are very welcome to attend in an observer capacity for the time being. But again, that's an item that that will be taken forward. Councillor McDade, you had a point of clarification.
Chair, before Councillor McDade comes in, can I just clarify? I just wanted to say, in terms of a governance point of view, your proposal about bringing an initial report to the Audit and Performance Committee on a discussion on clinical care and professional governance. In terms of the governance of the IGB, it would be appropriate, given that we do have the remit set up for the Clinical Care and Professional Governance Committee, that any initial discussions should take place at the IGB, which in terms of timescales, the next audit performance is mid-September and the next IGB is at the end of September. So my advice would be that any initial discussion would need to take place at board level, and if the desire of the board is to discharge its functions through the Audit and Performance Committee, that can be a decision of the board. But we would need to look at both the remit of the two committees at present. So my advice is to bring that initially to the IGB.
Okay. I'll take your advice on that, Scott, and thank you for that. And I don't know, is your comment, Jane, in relation to what's just been said, or?
It is. It's just to note that if that were the decision, then we will be requiring to change the annual governance statement of the IGB, and it would have to acknowledge that we don't have the necessary arrangements in place. Our plan, despite all of this kind of conversation, was to do exactly what members have been asking to the September Audit Committee, to bring forward what would be a regular report and an annual report to the September Audit and Performance Committee, and for regular reports to come thereafter. Now, that would then meet the annual governance requirements, but that is fine. We can address that in the annual governance statement if that is what's required in terms of the standing order, Scott. So just to note that point.
Well, thanks, Jane. Councillor McDade.
Okay, thanks, Chair. My point of clarification has in part been picked up by the clerk, which was, in my view, that this is a board matter to decide how to proceed. Mrs. Smith seems to have indicated that effectively a decision's already been taken, that they were going to take reports to Audit and Performance on this subject, which would be out with its current remit. So really, I would like clarity from yourself about exactly what is being proposed. Are we going to definitely, and I want an absolute guarantee insurance here, going to have a discussion around this to get a resolution on this in September at the board, or are you proposing something else?
Well, I can't promise a resolution to it. I can promise a proposal to set this out in September. I guess what I'm saying is, because of all the reasons that I've set out and others have set out, I don't see there, being it being possible to come up with a permanent solution today. I have a strong ambition for a permanent solution to be found in September, and all I'm suggesting is that we will obviously have to, potentially extend the meeting in September to accommodate such a discussion. So I absolutely want to find a solution in September that is acceptable to the members, but what I'm also saying is that in the interim, nevertheless, I wanted there to be a report prepared for consideration by IJB members at the in September, and the question really is whether that is most suited to the Audit and Performance Committee or to the IJB itself, and I'm not 100% clear on on which of these it should be, but I am chair of the IJB. Perhaps I should concentrate on my remit rather than anybody else's. But Callum, do you want to come in at this point?
Yes, just very briefly and follow on from what the Chief Financial Officer said. Yes, this was discussed at a recent meeting that we had, and I think what I said was that in the absence of the Clinical Care and Professional Governance committees being set up, which obviously I would still like to see progress, I was happy for it to come to the Audit and Performance Committee until we had found a permanent solution, although noting that the board still has an extant decision on that. If the clerk is advising that because of the remits that have already been set out that it would not be appropriate for it to come to the Audit and Performance Committee, that's fine, and obviously anything would be appropriate to come to the Integration Joint Board as the main governing body. So I'm happy to take advice from the clerk on that if that's the preference.
Okay, and Councillor McDade finally.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I agree with the position of the clerk on this. I think it should come to the IJB. I wonder, Chair, rather than extending the September meeting, should we not perhaps hold a special meeting in late August, early September to put the governance items onto that agenda and put it to bed separately so that it doesn't essentially take over the entire September meeting? Because I think this is I think we're going to have probably big discussions around this, as has been evidenced by today and previous discussions, and rather than lots of officers and others who maybe aren't relevant to the discussion having to sit through that, it could be done, and that would also get a resolution earlier as well. And if it then is going to go to Audit and Performance, it could go to the September Audit and Performance if that meeting was held prior to this Audit and Performance Committee. So perhaps one in late August, early September could allow us to have those discussions.
Okay, so I think what we'll say is I'll give a commitment to this coming to the IJB by the end of September, and if it is possible and feasible and dates can be found to bring that to a separate meeting, then we will endeavour to do that. But obviously that will need to be taken offline and considered, and you know how hard it is to get everybody's diaries aligned and what have you. But we'll certainly look into that and take that one offline.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so if that concludes that discussion, we'll agree to approve the clerk's report subject to these revisions that I've already outlined, and we'll try to ensure that that is appropriately reflected in the minute when it comes out. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to take a short recess at this point. It's now 3:13. If we can come back at 3:20, when I will ask Mr. Benson to take the chair for item 7, and between now and then we can reflect on. I think we have Dr. Hamish Dougal has joined us now in relation to item 7.4, primary care improvement plan, which is obviously very, very important, and it may be appropriate, depending on how much time Hamish has, to take that item next. But this meeting is now in recess and will resume at 3:20. Thank you.
Annie, could I have a
Hi, Bob. Okay.
Hello.
I think we're just going to go to Hamish Dougal next, so I'll just open the meeting again just now. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to this afternoon's meeting of the Integration Joint Board, and we're going to move on to item 7 on the agenda. For item 7.4, we are joined by Dr. Hamish Dougal, the Associate Medical Director, who has kindly reorganised his very busy diary to be able to attend today. So thank you for that, Hamish. And can I hand over to, in the first instance, to my Vice Chair, Bob Benson, to take items 7.1 to 7.4, starting with 7.4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And without any further ado, I'm going to move on to Hamish, to his very welcome paper. And Hamish, it's nice to see you again. Thank you. Please start.
Hi, Bob. So I'm just literally the second I joined the meetings. I've just heard my name mentioned. So are you ready for my paper?
Yes, I'm cheering on behalf of Eric at the moment because he has to do something else right now. So if you just proceed, that's grand.
It's taken me 25 minutes to get into the meeting, so I do apologise. And I'm mid-clinic, so I need to dash off afterwards. Yeah, thank you for letting me update you on the progress of the primary care improvement plan. This paper updates the IGB and the progress towards this. And to briefly recap on the background in this, in 2017, the Scottish Government published the new GMS, or General Medical Services contract, in recognition of the fundamental challenges being faced by general practice, not least by the growing workload and increasing risk. And the contract focused largely on an enhanced multidisciplinary team structure, reducing the risk to GP practices that was and is deterring many doctors from seeking GP partnerships, by the Health and Social Care Partnership taking on more of the staff required to make primary care work, and NHS boards taking on the leasing of premises from GP practices. These steps were to make general practice more attractive for recruitment, make the workload more manageable, and to allow GPs to focus more on undifferentiated presentations and complex care for the benefits of all our patients. Despite the pressures identified in 2018, the changes brought about by the COVID pandemic would have been impossible to predict, and therefore we find ourselves in quite a different place than we might have hoped to. Such areas such as IT, remote working, regional approaches to vaccination have been accelerated, while other areas have been difficult to progress with limited recruitment and a vast proportion of the operational and strategic leadership redirected to deliver an effective COVID response and vaccination programme. So we are now also seeing a surge in primary care workload, and in the last couple of months there's been higher demands recorded than any previous time before. Patients have been saving up problems due to their concern of not wishing to place any demands on the NHS. There's significant stretching of the mental health resilience of many, delays in being able to safely access some services such as minor surgery, joint injections, coil deployments, etc. in primary care, much longer waiting lists for non-urgent procedures and operations in secondary care, and this creates additional workload in primary care with patients requesting updates from their GP practice, longer duration of symptoms, requiring management, sick lines for periods off work, and these all create additional demand. And on top of that, we've got staff absences due to illnesses, and those needing to, who are parents who are often having to isolate now that there's more prevalence of COVID amongst the younger age group, and having to self-isolate. So it's all added to quite a huge pressure across the system. And if you ask any GP in Tayside at the moment, they probably really are feeling under the cosh. It's worth emphasising, however, at this point that despite these challenges and throughout the COVID pandemic, GP practices in P&K have been open. There's been a misperception in some quarters, I think, that health centres have been closed. How patients have been encouraged to access the services may have changed, and greater emphasis has been placed on telephone and video triage, but where patients have needed to see a GP, I believe P&K GPs have worked hard by and large in difficult circumstances to provide the best care they can. So in essence, with that background, there's not a great deal new to advise the IJB of in this update today. Due to all the implications of COVID, recruitment has fallen behind schedule. This is recognised by Scottish Government as an issue right across the country, and there's been an extension of the deadline from the end of March this year to the end of March next year for quite a number of the areas within the contract, and even beyond that into 2023 before the Health and Social Care Partnership is expected to assume responsibility for some of the services. Just going over some of the detail, it was anticipated that there would be an underspend in the initial 1 or 2 years and that this would be rolled forward as the contract was enacted. And this non-recurrent overspend, however, because of the reasons I've mentioned, is much greater than planned. And what we're doing at the moment is trying to identify ways to support primary care by spending this non-recurring funds to support local communities and primary care. So hopefully we'll come forward with plans at some point soon. Planning for the 2021-22 winter flu campaign is awaiting a regional plan and how this will go ahead, along with potential COVID vaccine boosters. And we're expecting the national advice later this week on that going into the winter programme. First contact physiotherapy and pharmacotherapy services are now thankfully pretty much fully recruited to. And to match the funding that was available. However, the workload as anticipated significantly outstrips the demand, outstrips the capacity that we have, but it's been a very welcome service. The ANP urgent support of urgent care model is currently being revisited as once again the demand for potential work for the community ANPs providing this urgent care support is significantly higher than the team can manage. Scottish Ambulance Service has also been unable to engage meaningfully in dialogue with us to develop this urgent care model due to pressures within their own services, understandably, throughout the last 18 months. It also takes time to train up these highly skilled clinicians, and given that these roles are relatively new, there's not a ready-made workforce available to recruit. GP practice-based mental health nurses and social prescribers have been recruited and are being well utilised, and patients speak very well of them in my experience within practices. All the GP practices now have access to some or all of the community care and treatment services. These include management of wounds, dressings, phlebotomy, suture removal and some minor injuries. Given the overall programme in P&K will by the end of 21-22 have employed around 85 whole-time equivalent staff, many of whom, because of the part-time, means that we're probably requiring space for somewhere in the region of 120 to 130 new staff, and it's perhaps not surprising that premises and workspace is an issue, and I believe that's already been covered in the meeting earlier. And we continue to pursue best ways to support that. GP clusters was also an element of the new contract, and these have worked extremely well in developing local COVID responses and in planning local service resilience at times when unprecedented demand was anticipated. In addition, they've helped coordinate the local vaccine supplies to ensure effective use of these and delivering many or most of the over 70s within communities. So the main risks to the full implementation at the moment of the intent of the 2018 GMS contract are probably summarised by insufficient resource to meet the demands of the new, to fully meet the aspirations of the new service, lack of suitable premises and office space and clinics, and also the recruitment of suitably skilled and qualified staff. Our primary care service manager, who's been working extremely hard to try and deliver this over the last 18 months, 2 years, has moved on from post, so we have a vacancy at the moment, but I'm delighted to report that I think, although perhaps not formally accepted, we've got a very good candidate who's now been interviewed and accepted the role, so hopefully you'll meet her in due course. I'm happy to take questions on the paper.
Thanks very much indeed, Hamish. Hamish, can you give an indication of how much time you have with us today?
Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm not too stretched.
Thank you very much. So I'm therefore inviting questions, and I have a question from Sandra Auld.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you very much for that, Hamish. That was very interesting and a really good overview of progress. I wondered, having received correspondence from patient regarding access to GP practice during the COVID situation, where practice is insisting on telephone or I think video consultation prior to a face-to-face consultation, whilst understanding the need and the rationale behind that, where sometimes there are patients who can't engage in that way, and this particular situation led to the patient not being able to have that, take part in that kind of consultation. I wondered, is there local guidance in place regarding virtual consultations and face-to-face?
No, I don't think there's local guidance. I mean, we have to remember these are 23 different independent practitioners, contractors that we can guide and support, but we can't stipulate. But I think there's, I mean, without going into the case specifics in detail, I think that the premise was that we wouldn't, most practices wouldn't want people with potential COVID infections coming into an area with potentially vulnerable other patients coming in to get their chemotherapy bloods or their immunosuppressant drug checks. So therefore, they had to put in place measures for safety of all their patients and their staff. But specifically to answer your question about access, one would hope that practices would be sensitive to the different needs. We amongst many other people would recognise that we have patients of different with different abilities for lots of different reasons to make use of phones or video consultations or face-to-face, and you would expect practice to be flexible in that.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Hamish, can you just say a wee bit more about the recruitment challenges? I think this is, there are lots of issues, of course, around for health and social care partnerships and workforce planning full stop. And is there anything more that our IJB could do to promote some of the challenges that you are facing, that you've very clearly outlined within your paper, and to bring it to other places if necessary? What would be your headlines, I would say?
I think it's a nationally recognised issue, Bob. I mean, I think if you look at the national papers coming out of Scottish Government on a lot of the different members of the multidisciplinary teams, then it recognises that there's a national shortfall, in all right across the board in different specialties. So I'm not sure there's anything additional we can do other than be a good employer, be supportive, and make it a good place to work. And hopefully the message will get out. I mean, I have to say I was a lot more pessimistic that we would fill our pharmacy team, for example, and we have done. So I'm absolutely delighted that we've increased from somewhere in the region of 9 pharmacists up to around about a team of 25 to 30, I think, if you include everybody, which is a phenomenal achievement. So, and yet we still don't have enough pharmacists. But that's a national issue, and we don't have enough doctors, and that's a national issue as well.
Thank you very much, and we'll just hold some of those comments and reflect on them. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for that presentation. I just want to ask about the financial issues. Obviously, in the report, you've referenced the fact that if we are to deliver the full intent of the contract, the current funding from the Scottish Government is not going to be sufficient. I'm just wondering, are we being expected to, clearly we would want to in order to get the benefits of some of the changes through the primary care improvement plan, but are we being expected to fulfil it in full without the funding, or is it a case of we are not going to have to meet the full requirements of the new contract until we get the funding, or is it not clear?
I think it's somewhere between not clear and that won't be expected. I mean, to my reading of the 2018 contract is that there are certain things that the Health Social Care Partnership need to deliver, and there are other areas within the contract which are seen as being very supportive. So, for example, taking blood samples is meant to be something that's not done in general practice anymore from March next year, and therefore the approach that I certainly have had in my own mind is we need to look at the things that we have to do those, and then with the funding that's available, and by reconfiguring some of our other services which might have complemented it, to try and get the best that we can out of that. But if we were to try and deliver, for example, all urgent care across Perth and Kinross, we would need many more nurse practitioners and paramedics, etc. So the way that my approach has been is that we're going to do as much as we can within the budget that we've got, and we have provided figures for Scottish Government, as have all other health social care partnerships, on what it would take to provide everything that the contract might wish to deliver.
Callum, do you wish to come back in again, please?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for that answer. I suppose I'm just wondering, you talked about some of the things like not taking bloods in surgeries and things like that, and moving them out. Are some of these changes envisaged as being spend to save proposals that might in the long run result in savings in other areas that could be reinvested? So I suppose the next question is, are there things that we should be looking at incorporating into our financial plan? I know we're obviously going to be revising hopefully a 3-year plan that the Scottish Government would not be expecting us to do, but actually might be beneficial for us as a health and social care partnership to be doing, that we're not doing already.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question to answer. I think if you look at different elements, so for example, our musculoskeletal waiting time. So traditionally, if you needed a physiotherapist, you'd be referred, and there'd be a waiting time to see a physiotherapist. And that waiting time, is sitting at several months, I think, at the moment. We also have a first contact physiotherapy service. So if you present with a new musculoskeletal problem to a general practice office, they can appoint you to a physiotherapist rather than to a GP, which would be the traditional route. If we can clear our backlog of musculoskeletal, then there is, in a sense, an ability to redistribute that workforce to be providing greater capacity at the first step in the first contact physio. So if we can improve the efficiencies behind the scene, we can, we can move that workforce forward. In terms of something like phlebotomy, which is quite labour intensive, I don't think there is any spend to save element there. That wasn't a service that we provided before, and it's now a service that will have to be provided. And the difficulty with that sort of thing is that general practices the workforce makeup is changing, and with time we won't have people. So the staff that some practices used to have that delivered that service may not any longer be in the practice, and the practice will not recruit another member of staff to do that. Therefore, they're entirely dependent on the Health Social Care Partnership to deliver that service. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's helpful. It's obviously things for us to consider going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I also note that Sarah Dickey has shared some useful reference information, which we'll make sure is included within the minute body. Thank you. Thank you for that, Sarah. Patricia Kilpatrick, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It's only usually my mother that calls me Patricia, but there you go. Good afternoon, Hamish. Thank you for your primary care improvement plan. I'm just focusing a little bit on mental health, and you've talked about DBIs and advanced nurse practitioners. Is it our target to improve the delay from a patient being discharged from psychiatric care to the community from the current time wait to something within the sort of 7-day period, or is that going to be because of workforce and shortages of community nursing staff? Is that not going to be achievable in the foreseeable future, Hamish?
Evelyn, do you want to pick up on that one? Because I think that's not part of the primary care improvement plan. That's a different aspect, and I think
I just wonder if it should be, though, because if people are having to wait a long time after they've been discharged from inpatient care to be picked up by the community mental health team, that seemed to be what the data was showing. So, and I do wonder if it should be part of that. Thank you.
Matt, if I could answer your question, and I was semi-prepared for you asking this question today, and I will share with you a presentation that we put
sorry to be predictable.
QPR, the QPR meeting last week in relation to a deep dive into follow-up of patients post-discharge from inpatient services. So we'll share it with you. And we did a deep dive over a month, and what we were really seeing is that 100% of our community mental health teams picked up patients in that 7-day discharge. There's information that isn't actually correct, but I'll happily share the presentation so you can get a sense of that. So yeah, so we didn't think the information was correct, and it certainly isn't. So
right. Well, that's helpful to know, because when it's presented at Care Governance, we can actually say now that information isn't correct, and in fact we've done our own audit or our own deep dive. So that's good news on that's good news on the mental health front. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Councillor McDade.
Thanks very much, Vice Chair. I just wanted to, thanks very much, Dr. McDougall, for your report. Very useful. I wanted just to pick up on obviously a lot of what you've talked about is about changing nature of delivery, and some of this will create new challenges, some of it might resolve certain previous challenges. But obviously the IJB 2 years ago agreed to re-establish the Bridgeverne GP practice, and I'm wondering if you can give us an update on where that is at and how that will sit within this and the wider sort of future for some of these smaller practices, perhaps.
I mean, there are probably two separate questions. The first question probably doesn't directly apply to this paper. But in terms of the sustainability of primary care, I think that's largely behind your question as well. And I think a large part of the work and the intent behind the primary care improvement plan is to support primary care services and make them more robust. They're certainly quite fragile, across the whole of Tayside, a number of different practices, even across Perth and Kinross. I've been into more than half a dozen practices in the last few years just to try and support them. We're looking to develop a resilience team to do that over and above what we're doing through the primary care improvement plan, and we have very active links with practice to try and support them early where we can, but we won't get limited ability at the moment until we get some sort of resilience capacity built in to do that. I think in terms of starting a new practice, we will be bringing forward hopefully a longer term view on what we think the questions need to be answered in terms of where should primary care be delivered over the next sort of 10 years, not over the next 1 year or 2 year or 3 years. But with the population changes, I'm very keen that we look at is a central model in Perth City where 8 practices sit within 450 yards of each other the best thing for servicing the population given the east and the west expansion. And just to reassure you that I've already had conversations with practices about what the art of the possible might be, but none of that is likely to happen overnight. It's going to need planning and a lot of discussion, but I'm very keen and have started that conversation with colleagues, and I hope we will be bringing together a sort of premises strategy, which is really a service basis of a service strategy going forward.
Thank you. And I would like to. Do you wish a supplementary, Councillor?
Yes, please, Vice Chair, if possible.
Okay.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful, and I think one of the things that I have talked about previously with colleagues of yourself is around having an integrated public sector approach to the wider public estate, which is, you know, a conversation that's been in the offing on a number of occasions, and sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't, and usually happens more when it just so happens that several people need to replace a building at the same time, and it happens that there is something that can be done about it. But I would hope that perhaps you could give me reassurance that those conversations will take place, and that we can perhaps not just have a look at the sort of public health estate, but actually do this with an integrated model, because obviously the wider public services interlink into health provision, and it's much easier for, you know, members of the public who are using these services if a lot of them can be co-located, and that a lot of more partnership working can take place and support as well. So I'm just hopeful that you can give me reassurance around that will be part of the strategy.
Certainly we want to enable access for patients where they're going to need services so that they're accessible, and that has to be core to that. But we have to remember that this is not just about buildings. If we had an all singing, all new, you know, property opening up in certain places in Tayside at the moment, the chances are we wouldn't be able to recruit a new team to populate that, because there's a recruitment issue and crisis. So that it's a really multifaceted problem that we have to have, you know, that we have to try and tackle, and we have to try and you know, state what we think our strategic objective is in terms of what is the best, you know, location and provision for our patients going forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Duff. John, are you there? Right, okay, yep. Obviously. Is that you, John?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now, John, thank you.
Okay, sorry,
I'm not hearing your question, John.
I think John obviously has a technical issue. I did note it was something re GP premises he put on the chat box to start with. John,
can you hear me now, Bob?
I can hear you now. If you make your question before you go off again, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. The mute button seems to be acting up. Yeah, I think it's probably been partly answered in relation to your answer to Councillor McDade's question, and that was obviously there are a lot happening in relation to primary care and their impact on GP practices in general. And your report obviously talks about the NHS board taking on responsibility for ownership of the GP practice premises themselves. I just wondered, you know, is there a time scale for that? And what happens if these premises are not suitable? Are you talking about, you know, new premises or taking on the existing premises, or is it a combination of things?
Yeah, it's probably a combination of things, combination of things, John. I think in Perth and Kinross we're quite fortunate by and large that most of the primary care premises we have are, you know, not universally, but by and large the premises are in quite good state at the moment. Although there is probably a significant backlog of maintenance requiring done, but by and large I think they're reasonable. So in terms of how these are going to be taken forward, there's a lot of private finance PFI initiative funded practices across Perth and Kinross. My understanding is that the current approach is that the NHS Tayside will start looking at taking over these leases within the last 5 years of the lease, and beyond 5 years they're not looking at them at the moment. I understand the first one has gone through, which was a Dundee practice, which is in a particular situation. There are now practices that are coming in under the 5 years in Perth and Kinross, or will be later this year. So hopefully, as the processes are put in place, these will start to develop a bit of momentum in getting these transferred over to NHS Tayside. The issue for some practices will be that, and I had one practice approach me just a couple of weeks ago asking for advice on this. Their lease runs has still probably got another 15 years to run, and one of the things that's putting off new partners coming into practices is the financial risk of taking on, you know, a 15-year lease of significant amount. If the practice folds because they can't recruit other GPs, then that financial responsibility remains with the individual, and they don't have a business to run it. And that's a real reality in some GP practices. I was speaking to one GP the other day who that is the reality of where they have a massive financial pressure, you know, given that their practice, this is not in P&K, it's probably not survivable. And therefore, if you've got a lot of practices who have had their leases taken over, the ones who've not may become less attractive as time goes forward. So it's a really dynamic situation, and we need to see how things go. But we need to work very hard with the primary care group in Dundee and NHS Tayside to try and progress these.
Okay, John, you content? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I think, Hamish, I'm not seeing any more questions. So what I'm going to do is to note the recommendations within your paper and invite the IJB to note the progress in the implementation of the Perth and Kinross HSCP's PCIP 2021, recognising the significant effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on implementation and the financial commitments made, and further to note the actions the Health and Social Care Partnership proposes to advance in respect of the PCIP in 2021 and 2 and the funding allocation. And again, recognising there will be some impact from the COVID-19 pandemic. And certainly I will be keeping an eye ahead, looking as to when we start to move into the winter time and winter planning as well. So I'm hopefully would nice to see you again sometime soon, Hamish. That would be great. Thank you for coming along today.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That now takes us back to 7.1. The strategic planning group update that we were discussing earlier on, and we have a verbal update by the Chief Officer, Gordon.
Thanks, Vice Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to provide a short verbal update to members of the IJB in relation to the strategic planning group meeting that took place on the 15th of June. I think we had committed to do so, and certainly when the SPG meets in future, we will be formally reporting to each of the IJBs on the business of the strategic planning group. So as previously indicated, the SPG met on the 15th of June. It was very well attended. We have, as indicated, revitalised the membership. We have been in a period of hiatus for over a year, but we've engaged with a number of new stakeholders in order that they can become members of the SPG. In addition to our public partners from the IJB, our independent sector and third sector representatives and trade union colleagues who are also members of the SPG. So the meeting took place on the 15th of June. There were about 13 or 14 stakeholders there. 4 or 5 IJB members observed the meeting, and a number of officers were in attendance. Inevitably, because this was the first meeting of a new group, our focus initially was on the terms of reference and remit. We looked at the guidance, the statutory guidance in relation to SPGs, the functions of the group. We considered the values and principles that we would operate under, and put the work of the group in the context of the reporting structure to the IGB and the other groups that will feed into the SPG. The substantive item that we considered, and we spent considerable time looking at this, is in fact the next agenda item on today's agenda, and that was around the remobilisation plan. So we took members of the SPG through the remobilisation plan and had, I think, a very rich and helpful discussion around it. There was some challenge, there was some query, there was some endorsement. Particular focus around the continued provision of PPE to the independent and third sector. The use of near me, and Sandra's earlier comments probably reflect some of the views around the limitations of near me, as well as a recognition of its reach and effectiveness and how valuable it has been. We had some discussion around long COVID and a very useful input from Angie McManus, our AHP lead, on the work that is being advanced across Tayside in response to the emergence of long COVID. And we had some discussion towards the end of the meeting, which actually meant that we couldn't conclude the full consideration of the remobilisation plan. It was quite a lengthy meeting on mental health services. So we had some queries and concerns, representations made in relation to the provision of mental health services, either locally or on a pan-Tayside basis. So there were a number of members of the SPG who are at today's meeting. They may wish to say a little bit more about any of that. We do, however, have a further meeting of the SPG scheduled for the 31st of August, and provisionally have indicated that our intention would be to bring forward the draft of the Community Mental Health Strategy, as well as a report on commission services and market facilitation. Vice Chair, I'm conscious of the time. I probably wouldn't want to take up any more time in terms of that item, other than to take any questions if members have any, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any immediate questions? Lee Robertson. Oh, sorry, they're leaving. If there's no immediate questions, I think the update is fairly clear. I'd now like to move on to item 7.2, which is the 2021-22 remobilisation plan, and there are a number of recommendations within it. Gordon.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and I shall endeavour to be brief in anticipation, hopefully, that members have had the opportunity to consider the remobilisation plan. I know that it was the focus of a development session, so that has previously been an opportunity for members, and it's brought today somewhat belatedly. We decided that we shouldn't present it in the pre-election period, or it would have been presented to the IGB earlier. But it's presented probably alongside the interim workforce plan, which is the other item that I would wish to speak to. But I'd like to sort of put them in a bit of context. Just I'm conscious that the Chair and yourself have alluded to some of the capacity pressures we're experiencing and some of the current demands in relation to COVID-19. It won't have passed members' attention by that COVID is significantly impacting on our communities, services and citizens at the moment. We're in a position where the number of cases per 100,000 in Tayside and across Scotland is higher than it's ever been. In Scotland, as of the 26th of June, there were 339 cases, Dundee 713, Angus 361, and in Perth and Kinross 325. These are the numbers of cases on a rolling average over 7 days per 100,000 of the population. The detail of that is important, but actually much more significant is to remind IGB members that at the peak of the second wave of the pandemic, those figures were around about 150 to 170. per 100,000. Now in January, at that peak, we had 172 people in hospital with COVID. Currently, we have around 20. That number fluctuates every few hours or every couple of days, and has. I think the significance of that for me, and it's important that IGB members understand this, is that we are seeing very high levels of cases in relation to COVID. It's impacting on our communities, on our primary care, on our social care services. But what we're thankfully not seeing is that translating into hospital admissions. Those people that are admitted to hospital would tend to be people who haven't had their second dose of the vaccination. It is really important that people get vaccinated. It's really important that people take up that offer. But thankfully also those people going into hospital are less likely to stay for as long as was previously the case, and are less likely to need intensive care input. So I suppose that's a bit of context that the IGB would wish to be cited on. But the operating realities for us as a health and social care partnership is that each of the three waves, if this is indeed a third wave of the pandemic, have really manifested themselves in different ways, and that requires us to adapt and change our response. What we are experiencing though is very significant workforce pressures, either as a consequence of the impact of the pandemic on communities and citizens and services and staff, or because we have always had some shortages and some vacancies. And the much earlier report today in relation to the financial position that we had at the end of last year evidences the fact that many of our underspends are a consequence of us having staffing vacancies. How we've offset that previously is about retasking staff from other parts of the service. We're less able to do that at the moment because the government is very committed to try to maintain COVID health services, non-COVID health services, and other aspects of the service offering. So it's balancing all these different risks. As a consequence, we have a number of services where we are risk assessing them and reviewing them and considering the extent to which we are able to sustain them through any measures available to us. And that might extend to us thinking about retasking, that might think about some short-term arrangements, that might require us to think about contingency arrangements. So we are continuing to experience significant pressures, those primarily around workforce. But remember, our workforce are also our citizens. These are people who are self-isolating. These are people who are amongst the folk that are being tested as positive. And these are amongst the people who are looking after children who have had to self-isolate because of contacts at school. So there's a number of variables that are impacting on the continued delivery sustainability of services. And inevitably, our focus is on mitigating the impact of some of these challenges. The remobilisation plan, which is presented to you at 7.2 on the agenda, is effectively our annual operating plan for this year. It, however, was submitted to the Scottish Government several months ago, and the considerations and the context that I've just described means that we will continue to see this as an iterative document, and some of the actions that we have identified in it will need to be accelerated, some of them will need to be refined, and some of them have perhaps in fact become obsolete. So we're continuing as a Health and Social Care Partnership executive team to review the actions and activities in the remobilisation plan and to bring forward reports on progress. One of the challenges is the short-term nature of the funding that underpins the remobilisation plan. It's non-recurring, and because a number of the actions within the remobilisation plan require us to bring in staff to employ new staff, that presents a bit of a challenge. We've got the workforce pressures, and our ability to attract people to short-term posts is obviously also quite limited. I think probably the penultimate paragraph, if I can find it, of the paper does describe the fact that this is very much a dynamic situation, and that, you know, we describe there how in parallel we anticipate seeing the operational demands reduce. That was maybe the case when we wrote this report 3 or 4 weeks ago. We certainly aren't seeing that, and that the IGB needs to be aware is going to significantly impact on our ability to take a more strategic view and to deliver strategic development plans across a number of services for 3 years, and financial plans that might underpin them. And we're having discussions with colleagues in the NHS and within the council about what implications that has, and they're dealing with the same challenges, because increasingly it feels like we're in a further year of response, we're in a period of recovery, in some cases we're in a period of contingency, and that will possibly limit the extent to which we can move into horizon gazing and 3-year plans and financial and transformational delivery in relation to service models. I'll stop there, Chair. Vice Chair, I'm conscious I've provided a lot of information. I'm conscious also people will have read the remobilisation plan or referred to it, and there may well be questions that people would wish to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon. And I'm aware that we also had a development session on quite a lot of this. So are there any questions? Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to ask about the contained in the remobilisation plan, the mental health and wellbeing hub, and it highlights some of the challenges that there have been in securing funding for that. I was just a bit confused as to who the provider was. It's been mentioned in a few papers that the provider is seeking funding, but I don't think it's been explicit who that is. And I suppose the question is it something that we could support financially if they're not able to secure external funding, because it seems like something that would be very much welcome. And also linked to that, there's talk in previous papers we've had about a crisis hub, although it's not explicitly referred to in this paper as a hub. Is the suggestion that the crisis hub would be co-located with the mental health and wellbeing hub?
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Maureen Summers would be very proud of you. These are matters that Maureen has raised, and I am very pleased to be able to respond. So the Mental Health and Wellbeing Hub is an initiative that third sector organisation Allstrong Scotland have been trying to initiate, and they had sought funding from a number of sources. And as far as I understand, and Evelyn Devine may be able to update on this, to date they haven't secured the funding that they've been looking for. A couple of things about that. They, as far as I'm aware, haven't made an approach to ourselves for any funding support. I think their intention was to try not to rely on statutory services and to try to operate in a way that wasn't dependent on funding from either the health service or the council. We would, though, however, be keen to engage with them if that was something that we could assist with. But again, probably important to locate that in the context of the emerging development of our community mental health strategy, because it will need to very clearly identify the priorities, the available funding, and the way in which we can support a range of organisations to deliver community mental health services. And that absolutely does include non-statutory provision. As you'll know, and as we've said, and as is articulated through our strategic commissioning priorities, we are very keen to try to keep people well, to keep them healthy, to keep them active and connected, and not just to invest in services that respond to poor health and poor mental health. So Evelyn could possibly supplement my answer in that regard. In terms of the Crisis Hub, that is something different. That is a service that has been initiated by another third sector organisation, Anchor House, and it's the NUC, and it provides crisis response to people in stress and distress, and is something that we have provided some funding to in order that they can consolidate and develop and support that model. And we very much benefit from the provision and welcome the opportunity to continue to support it in any way we can, as we see it as a very important alternative for people who are in distress, who can get peer support, who can get time out, who can have a safe place to go to, that people who might otherwise find themselves in more extreme situations, potentially in accident and emergency or in Police Scotland's hands. So these are both initiatives that we're keen to support, one of which we are actively engaged with. I think we have All Strong Scotland on the Community Mental Health Strategy stakeholder group, but as I say, I'm not aware that they've been keen to pursue funding options from ourselves, but we remain ready to support them if need be. Evelyn, do you want to add anything to that, please?
Gordon, I think your comments around Scotland All Strong are exactly correct, and I don't think I have anything else to add to that really, but Chris Lamont is in regular contact with them as our lead for the mental health strategy, so you're absolutely right. We haven't been approached to support in terms of their initiative at the minute. In relation to the crisis hub, I think just to put a little bit more context around it, from a Tayside perspective, it's absolutely part of the review of the crisis team across Tayside, and the preferred option in relation to what has been proposed to date is that the three HSCPs will look to support a third sector organisations in relation to providing that crisis support hub, which is absolutely integral to our mental health strategy locally, and we will be working that through with the providers currently. So yeah, it's well on the radar across Tayside, and will be supported by the redesign of capacity around crisis into the three HSCPs in the longer term, but that obviously will need formal working through in terms of HR and organisational change issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Pat Kilpatrick.
I just wanted to congratulate Evelyn and Gordon, or whoever the author of this was. I thought it was a really good remobilisation plan. I thought it was very detailed and it was quite ambitious. So I just wanted to say credit where credit's due, and well done.
Thank you. And as I remember, I think it was pretty unqualified. It went straight through. In fact, it came back again from government. Excellent. Gareth Lalowicz.
That would be Maureen Summers, Bob.
Oh, I see. Sorry, Maureen. Is that your alternative name? Thank you.
You're on mute, Maureen.
Yes, I'm up at PCAB's Carer Centre, and Gareth set me up on the laptop for the meeting here, so that's why that's come up. But just a couple of things on both the hubs. The Mental Health and Wellbeing Hub, if that is the drawback, that they're reluctant to approach health or the council for funding, is there any way that they can have discussions or be encouraged to come into discussions with the health and the council to assure them that they will have free scope to go ahead? I think they maybe feel there'd be restraints put on them in that if they got funding from the health or social care. And is there any way that you could meet with them to give them reassurances and hopefully get this off the ground, because it's so badly needed now, and if that is the main drawback, I think we have to make proactive, approaches to them to resolve it. And the other thing is that,
do you wish to make another point, Maureen, or do you wish Gordon to address that first one?
Well, I don't know whether he wants the other point as well. It's about the crisis hub. It's been going for some time now, the nuke, and I just wondered if someone could obtain some feedback from them as to how things are going there. You know, how many people have actually gone through the nuke, and how many of them have had overnight stays? Has their situation been resolved, and were they referred on to the community mental health teams or inpatient services? You know, I think we need to have some sort of feedback as to how the service is going. It's been running now for, I would say, well over a month now. Like, you know, we need to know how it's been utilised. So. Thank you.
Gordon, do you wish to take that one?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, I'd want to acknowledge Pat's comments. I'm grateful for the acknowledgement and the commendation for the remobilisation plan. It has been very much a collective effort, and it includes significant contribution from members of the executive management team and the integrated management team. But it's probably important, I would wish to acknowledge Jane Smith's contribution in coordinating and driving that work forward. So thank you very much for that, Pat. In terms of Maureen's question, yes, Scotland All Strong. They're members of the stakeholder group. Chris Lamont, who is leading on our mental health strategy, is in discussions with them, and certainly we'll extend that offer, Maureen. But one of the other things that we can probably do is engage colleagues within Perth and Kinross Council who are well able to provide advice on other sources of funding and to support bids to various other organisations, either locally or nationally, should that be an option that they would wish to consider and they might want support with. So we have some colleagues in the council who might be able to support that and perhaps locate it in the context of the community planning partnership work. So that's what I would say in that regard. In terms of the nuke, we've provided minimal funding to the nuke. They've very much wanted to initiate on off their own bat. They've set up, they've developed a model. We've provided some advice, we've provided some financial support and input, but they aren't directly accountable in any way to ourselves. However, should we move to a position where they're an integral part of the crisis response across Tayside, we would then be looking at providing additional funding, we'd be looking at commissioning that service, we would be looking at a contract that would include them providing us with information on their effectiveness, their impact, their activity. We can perhaps have that discussion less formally at the moment and get some feedback from them, or we can perhaps get some information that they might be taking to their own management committee in the spirit of partnership and working effectively together. But because they're not accountable to us, it would be difficult to expect that they would report to us in terms of their performance. But as I say, that shouldn't preclude us from having those sorts of conversations, and we'll take that forward out with the meeting. Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you very much indeed. I have a question from Sandy Watts.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just a brief question, please, for a bit of clarity. We had a meeting of the Third Sector Health and Social Care Forum yesterday, and certainly forum members welcomed this document and found it very helpful indeed. It does refer to the merging of the Provider Forum and Supported Living Forum, and mentions that the Third Sector Forum and the TSI will be invited to join. And I wondered if there was any clarity over what that will mean and how that might, if there are any timescales around it, please.
Gordon.
Yeah, so we are conscious that there are a number of constituent groups, and we need to try to harness that collectively and look at how we can bring people together to better understand the perspective of the third sector, people with lived experience and unpaid carers. So that's something that we're looking at, and we're conscious we've got the PCAVs providing the third sector interface. We also have the Third Sector Forum, and we're very keen that that becomes empowered and enabled to support the work of the IJB. But equally, we do have the reference group, which Sandra may wish to say something about, and who I met with on Friday, who are also able to sense check and challenge and inform the work of the IGB and through the SPG. So the important thing for us is probably, this was a similar question to one that was asked at the SPG at the Strategic Planning Group. And it's important probably that we represent that diagrammatically and show how these groups all work together. The proposal in the paper is really about trying to consolidate that, and it might be that Zoe Robertson may wish to say a little bit more about the discussions that are ongoing and the timescales there. I don't know, Zoe, if you're still with us.
Yeah, no, I'm still here. Hi, Sandy. Rona Pollock, who helps chair the Adult Provider Forum, has met with Gillian, certainly, to discuss the proposal of merging the Third Sector Forum with the Adult Supported Living Forum. So there's no timescale that I'm aware of or that I've been made aware of, Sandy, as yet. But I'll speak to Rona after this and we can get back in touch with Gillian just to look at how that might work. But certainly we're proposing that every second meeting for the Supported Living Provider Forum became a Third Sector Forum or an amalgamation of the two forums, just to try and join some of those dots.
Thank you. And I would like to move to Councillor Duff, Young Carers, I believe.
Thanks, Bob. Hopefully you can hear me okay this time.
Yeah,
thanks very much for the report, which is an excellent read, to be honest with you. I was interested in the section on page 99 about carer support, and it talks in there, amongst other things, about ensuring that carers are involved in the development of strategies and that their voice is heard. I'm aware from other stuff that I've read that we do have carers, I think I'm right in saying, as young as 5 years old, and I wondered what procedures are in place that we might be able to capture some of the voices of our younger carers, maybe not as young as 5, but you know, some of our teenage carers perhaps.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, Vice Chair. So absolutely, I mean, it's not enough to say that the Health and Social Care Partnership is only concerned with adult services, because very many young carers will be looking after their parents who are our service users, either because of substance misuse difficulties or physical or mental health issues. So yes, young carers will be key to our work. The leadership in relation to young carers primarily comes from within the council, John, and Jackie Pepper and her colleagues are actively involved in looking at supporting young carers. Our focus has been on adult carers, and we are supporting PCAFs to deliver carer support groups. But what we've also got is PCAF's Young Carers Lead is on the Strategic Planning Group. So we are very keen to look at that transition and that crossover. There is a distinction in relation to what we want to do in relation to supporting adult carers. Is about recognising that we should get alongside adult carers and enable them to continue to care for as long and as much as they can, but they should have a life out with carers, out with caring. With young carers, it's important to reflect that often being a young carer can deny young people their childhood and social opportunities. It can impact on their education, and it can affect their friendships and their future aspirations. So we need to be sure that we're working across the system with our council colleagues, with PCAVs, and in terms of the work that we're doing with adult carers, in a way that ensures that we're supporting people to either continue to care where they want to, or to get respite and relief and a life out with caring. So we're very committed to looking at that, and that is part of the work of the SPG and the broader carer strategy activity.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And finally, I have Sandra Auld.
Thank you very much. It was just to pick up on Gordon's point about the reference group, and I suppose the usefulness of having that, and the ability then for views from service users, etc., and public partners to be able to be fed back to this group. and hopefully also to be able to utilise the strategic planning group as well. You know, the revitalisation of that, which is really welcome. But just to, I suppose, utilise the opportunity Gordon's given me here is just to re-emphasise he's smiling, he knows what I'm going to say. So the reference group met on Friday, and part of the rationale for the timing of that is to be able to discuss the IJB papers. So I would just say again, you know, could we please have the papers as giving us as much of a gap before the actual meeting as possible, because it just wasn't possible to discuss anything that was on the agenda for today, and that kind of defeats the, you know, it takes away some of the usefulness. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Gordon.
Yes, that point's noted, and I gave a commitment to Sandra on Friday and to the reference group that we'll look to be delivering those papers in advance much earlier. You know, that's inevitably also something that IGB members would ask of us in order that they have the opportunity to read the papers. I hope that on Friday the lack of papers, Sandra, was more than compensated for by the Chief Officer speaking for an hour non-stop, and apologies if I got in the way of any other business that you were hoping to consider.
No, so I absolutely not at all, and just to again reiterate my thanks and appreciation, Gordon, for you coming along to the group. It was extremely worthwhile, and we look forward to yourself and maybe others from the executive group coming back again in the future.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And given there are no other questions, can we move to accept the recommendations to endorse the 2021-22 remobilisation plan, noting that its implementation will ensure ongoing delivery of agreed strategic objectives, and further to agree that quarterly updates be provided on progress as part of the agreed performance reporting framework. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. That now takes us to the Health and Social Care Partnership 21-22 interim one-year workforce plan. Gordon.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. And my earlier comments about the challenges that we're experiencing in relation to workforce obviously equally apply to this paper. So this is paper 7.3. It commences at page 121 of your papers today. Again, I shall try to be brief in anticipation that members will have had the opportunity to review the workforce plan. I'd probably just want to put it in context. This was something that the Scottish Government asked us to produce in the same way as they asked all health and social care partnerships and NHS boards to produce a one-year plan, which we had to submit, I think, by the end of March. Apologies if that date's perhaps not right. We were actually working on the assumption that we would be delivering a three-year plan, a three-year workforce plan by the end of next March. Now that's still going to be the case, but the SGA, the Scottish Government, requested an interim plan aligned to the remobilisation plan to cover the period of 21-22, recognising that workforce issues will be key to the delivery of the remobilisation plan and key to the recovery of services. This plan was developed in the context of workforce being one of the most significant strategic risks of the Health and Social Care Partnership, and that's been reported in our strategic risk register. We produced it through as much engagement as we could in the time available with various operational leads, with contacts in the independent third sector, with our clinical advisors' contribution being key in terms of the challenges around the recruitment of doctors, of nurses, of social workers, allied health professions. And it is presented to the IJB for your consideration. We have had the opportunity to review it within the Health and Social Care Partnership, and we'll do so in the context of seeing it very much as a platform to build the 3-year plan that we do need to submit to Scottish Government by the end of March. Now, there's a couple of contexts to this that are worth highlighting. This work was produced without us having a dedicated workforce lead. The Health and Social Care Partnership doesn't have that post, doesn't have that capacity. So that's been one of the limiting factors, and we have relied on our colleagues in NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council to provide some support in that regard. But there's also been a bit of a dearth of workforce data, and that's something that we would wish to attend to, and would want to ensure that that is more robustly included in our 3-year plan. Hence, one of the recommendations that you'll see in the report today pertains to us bringing in some additional capacity to provide support around workforce planning, project planning and programme support. And otherwise, I wouldn't propose to go into any much more detail in this regard, Vice Chair, other than to refer you to the report and to the recommendations at the page 122 in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon, and it's a fairly full document, and we've got the recommendations. Can I take any questions, please? Donald McPherson.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to Gordon and the team for what's a very comprehensive and well thought through plan, I thought. Now, I have questions on 2 separate themes, one around staff wellbeing and one around commission service, and I'm not sure what the house rules are here. Should I give you them both at the one time, or do I?
Donald, I think you just go on with it. That's great.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, my first one, as I say, it's around staff wellbeing, and there's a very helpful chart in the paper at page 131 on staff wellbeing drivers. Now, the one, and I looked at that also through the lens of one of my other roles as whistleblowing champion, and I didn't see that's whistleblowing champion for NHS Tayside, obviously. What I didn't see was anything about giving staff the confidence that they could raise concerns openly, which I think is a key element for staff wellbeing, and I wondered whether that was an omission. And following on from that, it did prompt the question, well, how does the IJB satisfy itself that there are effective whistleblowing arrangements in place so that where there are concerns in the workforce, that they are handled openly and effectively? So that was
Can I suggest that Gordon addresses that question?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm having some technical difficulties. I hope you can hear me. I heard most of what you said, Donald, up until the point where you queried whether or not it was an omission. That we don't have that detailed within the workforce plan. I think if you as you whistleblowing champion are drawing our attention to it, I think it is a case of mea culpa. We haven't explicitly referenced the approach that staff can take in relation to whistleblowing. As you would probably expect me to say, what we seek to do is to engage and consult and involve staff proactively so that whistleblowing activity is less necessary, but we absolutely respect people's right to raise complaints and concerns anonymously. And if that's something that we need to either address in the context of this interim plan, or perhaps with your forbearance, provide assurance that would be something that we would incorporate into the 3-year plan that is now under development, that would seem to be an appropriate way forward. It is important to reflect back to the IJB, as you will recognise, that the staff that this pertains to in relation to the in-house provision of health and social care services are staff who are employed by the NHS or who are employed by the council rather than by the partnership or by the IJB. And those are staff who will be entitled to and supported to avail themselves to access to any of the HR policies that are available to any employee of the organisations. But yes, to acknowledge that we haven't explicitly referenced that, and we will look to address that in the next iteration. Thank you.
Okay, and Donald, your next question.
Thank you. I was just going to say the other point that I think you maybe lost was about how you gain assurance as an IGB around whistleblowing activity, and agree maybe that's something that can be picked up as you develop the 3-year plan. So I'm getting a lot of feedback. Are you also getting feedback from people?
Just a little, Donald, but persevere.
I'll be brief. My other question was around commission services, and I see, we recognise that low pay is an issue across the health and social care sector, recognised in Feely. I noticed that for commission services in the paper, you say that you expect providers to pay the living wage. I just wonder, what are you doing to enforce and audit that? And importantly, does that include travelling time between appointments, which can be significant, obviously, in Perth and Kinross?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I'm seeing Zoe hopefully put her camera on. Zoe oversees our commission services, and certainly the financial arrangements that we've put in place have passed on to independent and third sector providers the uplift that enables them to pay the Scottish living wage. And in fact, I think last year we provided that to the whole contract value and not just the amount that's paid into the pay packet of the individual social care worker as a result of the Scottish Government passing on that funding. Zoe, I'm not sure whether you would maybe be able to answer the question around compliance. This is difficult. We've got a bit of a vicarious or a proxy liability here. These are people employed by private and third sector organisations. But Zoe may wish to say something about that, as well as maybe something more broadly about our ambition to move towards a more outcomes-based approach to commissioning. But that's maybe for another day, actually. Thanks.
Hi, Donald. Yeah, the issue that you're describing is particularly pertinent to care at home delivery, and we do audit that closely because it is an expectation that they do pass on the uplift to their employees. And what we're really wanting them to do is to pay full shift into and travel time and everything else that's encompassed within the Ethical Care Charter. And they're not all entirely compliant with that, although they go about paying their staff in different ways to ensure that they top up and do have different mechanisms in and around that. But I think what we're doing as we move forward is developing, as Gordon is briefly mentioned there, an outcome-focused approach to care at home. So what we will be seeking to do with those providers is to allocate block hours to them from there to distribute work in a way that suits them and that allows their staff to be paid for a full shift as opposed to in a time and task method, which is how it is working largely and has worked for a long period of time. So we're in the process of, through our care at home review, seeking to change that sort of culture and mindset around mindset, sorry if I could get that out, around care at home delivery, and are piloting several small tests of change with providers at the moment to ensure that they can deliver their service in a way that is not limited by minimal visit times, and that they are able to deliver a more enriched service and give them more autonomy as providers. But as I say, we do audit how they pay their staff and whether or not they pay full shift on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And now I have Sarah Dickey.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair, and thank you, Gordon, for the interim workforce plan. It's not a question as such, more of a comment in regard to perhaps some narrative I would have liked to have seen in respect to the nursing workforce section. So my first observation is that the workforce tools currently are mandated and required to be run on a frequent basis, and they're not all new, so those tools would inform all, whether interim or final workforce plans. Secondly, I know that Scotland as a whole is promoting the use of the 6-step methodology to the workforce planning, so it would be useful to see reference to that methodology informing any workforce planning going forward. And finally, I note that the report does make reference to the Health and Care Staffing Act passed in 2019, which is, as it refers to, currently on hold. It might not be on hold quite so far as 2022 though, and there will be ongoing discussions, and I'll be happy to advise members when the implementation of the Act conversations recommence, because that will be vital to inform the plan across all health and social care workers across the partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Gordon.
Thank you. Just to acknowledge those comments, I'm pleased there wasn't a question mark at the end of that, Sarah. Absolutely. We can take that conversation into the discussions that we have as we evolve and develop the plan. We've sought to pull together the best version in the time available with the resources available, and there will be refinements and developments, and your contribution as lead nurse advisor to the IJB and support to Dawn Wigley, our current lead nurse, will inform that, and we will be very grateful for that moving forward. So thank you very much for those comments and reminders.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and we'll try to, I'm sure Gordon will bear that in mind when it comes to implementing these further to the recommendations. Oh, sorry, I'm getting my own feedback now. Okay, I have no other questions. Can we move to support the recommendations? And to approve the PK Health and Social Care Partnership 1 year 2021-22 interim workforce plan, and further supports the appointment of a 2-year fixed term workforce planning lead for PK HSCP to support the development of the 3-year workforce plan. Does that get approval? Thank you. That's excellent news, Gordon. You can now move on with that important appointment with the support of the board. Thank you. I have now got the for information documents, which I think we can now just go through. Oh, good timing, Councillor. Eric, do you wish to...
Bob. Yeah, I've been here all the time.
All right, thank you.
5 minutes when I was when my machine had to be switched off, otherwise it would have exploded after today's meetings. So apologies for that.
We now got to item 8 for information.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Bob, for dealing with these items. Much appreciated. Just okay, so item 8.1 in terms of the forward planner. Again, fairly self-explanatory, I think. Obviously, we've spoken earlier about the potential for some change to meetings in September, and that will be reflected. But other than that, these papers, I think, speak for themselves, unless, Gordon, you wish to add something. I think you're there now, Gordon.
I'm having problems with my mute button, sorry.
That's it. Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, okay. It's still showing on my screen that I'm muted. No, I would just reference the paper, and in some respects this does help set our agendas for moving forward, although we will take cognizance of the comments earlier about public partner involvement in agenda setting, but very much the forward planner gives us the sort of skeleton for what reports are due to come when. So it's just really for people's information today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions on that, or are there any questions on that? No. So items 9 and 10 are the planned dates for future IJB meetings and future IJB development sessions for noting in members' diaries. Okay, thank you very much everyone for your attendance this afternoon. It's been another long one, and we've covered a wide range of business. So thank you to everybody for their participation this afternoon. And unless there are any further comments anyone wishes to make, which hopefully not, the meeting is therefore closed. Thank you very much.